Welcome to 3 hours of the very best malicious compliance posts from the past year. If you're a fan of malicious compliance, this is not one to miss. These are the most upvoted posts on Reddit from 2023. Now, before we get into that, I also just need to say this is actually the final movie in Redditor's Movie Week. If you didn't know, I've released a movie, a 3-hour compilation of some of the very best Reddit posts every day for the past 7 days, including this one. If you're new to the channel, you didn't know that, I've left a link to all the other 6 down below if you want to check them out. But if you've already listened and watched through all of them, then thank you. It's been a pretty crazy week. You guys have absolutely loved it. And yeah, here we go. This is the final one, episode 7, movie 7, malicious compliance. Let's go. Boss says, if you're 1 minute late, I'm docking 15 minutes from your time. Gets mad when I don't work the 15 minutes I was docked for free. This happened about 4 years ago. I do construction and we start fairly early. My boss got tired of people walking in at 6:05 or 6:03 when we start at 6, even though he was a few minutes late more consistently than any of us were. So he said, if you aren't standing in front of me at 6 o'clock when we start, then I'm docking 15 minutes from your time for the day. The next day, I accidentally forgot my tape measure in my car and had to walk back across the job site to grab it. Made it inside at 6:01. My boss chewed me out and told me he was serious yesterday and clocked me 15 minutes. So I took all my tools off right there and sat down on a bucket. He asked why I wasn't getting to work, and I said, I'm not getting paid until 6:15, so I'm not doing any work until 6:15. I enjoy what I do, but I don't do it for free. He tried to argue with me about it until I said, if you're telling me to work without paying me, then that's against the law. You really want to open the company and yourself up to that kind of risk? Maybe I'm the kind to sue, maybe I'm not, but if you keep on telling me to work after you docked my time, then we're going to find out one way or another. He shut up pretty quickly after that, and everyone else saw me do it and him cave. So now they're not going to take this rubbish either. Over the next few days, guys that would have been 1 or 2 minutes late just texted the boss, hey, sorry boss, would have been there at 6:02 and gotten docked, so I'll see you at 6:15 and I'll get to work then. And then they sit in their cars until 6:15 and came in when their time started. So between people doing what I did or just staying in their cars instead, he lost a ton of productivity and morale because he decided that losing 15 minutes of productivity per person and feeling like a big man was better than losing literally 1 or 2 minutes of productivity. Even though everyone stands around BSing and getting material together for the day until about 6:10 anyway. After a few weeks of that, he got chewed out by his boss over the loss of productivity and how bad the doc timesheets were looking and reflecting poorly on him as a leader because we were missing deadlines over it. And it showed that you don't know how to manage your people. And then suddenly his little self-implemented policy was gone and we all worked like we were supposed to and caught back up fairly quickly. Worker solidarity for the win. Not one person took his rubbish and worked that time for free after he tried to swing his weight around on them. But obviously I was a target after that and only made it 2 more months before he had stacked up enough BS reasons to get away with firing me when I called in a few days in a row after my mum fell and I took off work to care for her and monitor her for a while during the day. Yeah, I was gonna say, OP, you kind of made yourself a target and I'm not too surprised that this happened. However, you've got to take solace in the fact and be proud that you as an individual have saved a lot of employees so much time and money, I guess, by not working for free for 15 minutes. If you add up the collective 15-minute periods that you have saved your employees by doing what you did and taking a stand against your boss, that is a lot of time and money right there. So yeah, feel good about that. Supervisor asks student with cancer to turn on their camera during a virtual meeting, and you won't believe what happens next. Clickbaity article titles aside, it's a long one. It happened 2 days ago and I'm still giddy. Enjoy. First of all the below names are pseudonyms, and there are 2 important background things to know for this story. 1, I was diagnosed with a rare ovarian cancer at the beginning of this year. I had surgery and some chemo and I'm mostly recovered now. I still have to go in for frequent testing and occasional monitoring. I'm a private person to the extent that I have dated people for years without telling my parents, so you best believe random co-workers and bosses are unaware of my medical history. 2, I attend a university that has an ambassador program. Basically, if you have a high enough GPA, you are able to interview for the program. And if you get in, they pay for your tuition during the time you are an ambassador. In exchange, you work 5 hours a week and work graduation or other events. I am one of those ambassadors. This is my story. My supervisor for the ambassador program, Miss M, has spent the majority of our time together belittling me. As I sit here about to type about her, I find myself already exasperated thinking about reliving some of the details, so I'll be short and sweet for both your sake and mine. She follows every rule to the letter and leaves no room for collaboration or discussion. As an example, we use Microsoft Teams for communication, and she has us clock in and out in a group of 20 people by saying, "I'm here," and "I'm leaving." So every day you have to scroll through dozens of messages to find anything of importance and listen to notification sounds every time someone so much as takes a lunch break. I suggested using the time clock function on Teams and even offered to set it up for us, and was told that I was deliberately undermining my position. Another quick example is her vehemence when I told her I didn't have any social media to advertise the college. She was certain I was lying and went so far as to ask the other ambassadors to try and find me. They didn't. There's nothing to find. Crazy concept. I've challenged her at a couple of junctures, but ultimately realized I was fighting a losing battle and I'd be better off keeping my head down. Fast forward to 4 days ago, Friday. There's a mandatory virtual event in 3 days on Monday where the dean of the college would talk to the ambassadors as well as live stream the event to the college's website and YouTube page. Miss M sent out a message that I will copy and paste here because the formatting is so dramatic that it makes me chuckle. Students must have their cameras on and phones off. Repeat, phones off, cameras on. Like, come on lady, bold, caps, or italics. Your email almost gave me a stroke. I follow up the same day. Miss M, unfortunately, I will be at a doctor's appointment at this time and will be unable to turn my camera on during the event. No response. I sent another email to follow up. No response. The day of the event rolls around. I DM her through Microsoft Teams 10 minutes before. I see that she's seen the message with a red receipt, nothing. Okay, video chat starts and several students join the sessions with their cameras on. Then the dean. He gets halfway through introducing himself and Miss M interrupts him as he takes a brief pause and says, "Excuse me, could we please have all of the students turn their cameras on?" I say nothing but put a quick message I already had typed in anticipation in the group chats. "Miss M, I have a private situation that bars me from turning on my camera. I've contacted you individually." Not but a few seconds after I send it, I get called out by name and I respond audibly, "Miss M, I cannot turn on my camera at this time." And she responds, "Expectations were clear and you were told multiple times about this. Every other student here managed to do it and I expect the same out of you." Now, one of the cool things about having cancer is you become very familiar with the hospital staff. And if you're lucky, they're fun to talk to. During COVID, my nurses were my tethers to sanity because no one could visit me while I had inpatient infusions. So, I told one of my nurses, Amy, about this situation beforehand. She joked that if I was told to turn my camera on, I should really play up my illness. In any other situation, I would have been entirely opposed, but sweet revenge was in sight. When I replay it in my head, I imagine that anime fist-clenching thing when the protagonist resolves to get revenge. I set my laptop back a bit further from myself, on my legs, so you could see the entirety of me in my hospital regalia. Teams will display the person currently talking as the largest image in chat. Everyone had their audio off except me, the dean, and Miss M. So when I turned my camera on, I was immediately displayed as the EKG loudly thrummed away on max volume thanks to Amy. Silence. I asked Miss M through email and Teams if I could opt out of having my camera on, but she insisted. I waited a beat to see if anyone would say anything, and then continued with my special vocal blend of melodramatic gratitude and illness-laden shakiness. Virtual engagement is so important for this new era of learning. I can see why having the camera on is important, though I was hoping I might be granted an exception. The dean then said to me, "You are more than welcome to turn your camera off. I am so sorry for the misunderstanding. Thank you so much for making a special exception for me. It's been a difficult week, but I feel grateful to be here." Then 2 people leave the call. One was Miss M, and the other was Anthony, who was Miss M's boss. I didn't even know he'd been there. I haven't heard from either of them yet, but I'm awaiting a follow-up with anticipation. I'm typing this from the hospital and feeling gratitude for a lot of things. 'Tis the season after all. I'm here, I'm alive, and above all, this stupid disease won't stop me from putting a bully in their god-dang place. I mean, how embarrassing is that? How embarrassing. I imagine there's a very high chance that this teacher or supervisor is about to get fired straight away. It's clear negligence, like they've seen the message. Why not just say, yeah, personal reasons, let's leave her to it? What difference does it make having someone have their camera on or not? At least they're there. I mean, come on. Really? You're gonna argue against personal reasons and then just having it thrown right back in your face by OP? Brilliant. And I really hope this teacher, supervisor, whatever she is, thinks long and hard about this and understands how dangerous what she demanded was. And look, the karma was great. It's a shame that OP had to do that, but by doing that, you've shut this woman up and potentially even cost her a job. Brilliant stuff. Now moving on to our second story of malicious compliance. As per my NDA, I'm not allowed to discuss this position with former employers. Since my firing is effective immediately, you are now a former employer. Gather round as I tell you the story of the time I got fired at the worst place I've ever worked. From day one, it was a nightmare. There was zero onboarding or training. I was simply given the login info for a couple of different websites and told to get to work. This company planned large conferences and I was in charge of speaker coordination. I was the only person in this role. The information solely resided with me. Not a big deal, I say to myself. I'm good at thinking on my feet. I'll just ask questions when I need clarification on something. That turned out to be impossible. My manager's first language wasn't English. I'm all for learning new languages. I think it's a great skill to have, and it takes a lot of work, and being able to speak multiple languages is impressive. The problem was that her English was so poor that it was often very hard to understand what she was trying to say. I once asked if she had time to hop on a call and explain something to me, and she responded with, "No cran, self-skills is a must, I am bird without head." It took me a few days to figure out that she was trying to say that things were hectic, she was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, and she needed me to be self-sufficient. Regardless, I did my best in the position. Small mistakes happened here and there, but overall, all the speakers were very happy and felt well supported. I struggled on the communication with my manager, but I thought the company was happy with my work. Until 4 months in, when I was randomly pulled into a meeting with my manager, HR, and legal. Effective immediately, I was fired. I asked why I was being fired and why this was the first I'd heard of any problems. Why wasn't there a write-up or a verbal warning? My manager said it was because the 10 minutes, I ran the analytics, it takes me to respond to an email was too slow. That was a BS reason, and we all knew it. If you don't like me personally, fine, but don't try and make this seem like I was a bad employee. To be honest, I was furious. We do the exit interview with HR, and then she asked me to send over any documents I had. We worked on personal computers remotely, and describe where I was at in regards to our next events and our speakers. NDAs are really common in this field. I've signed one at every job I've ever worked. But this employer's NDA had a clause in it that worked to my advantage. I said, as per my NDA, I am not to discuss intimate details or share documents relating to this position with any employer, past or future. Since this firing was effective immediately, you are now a former employer and I'm bound by my NDA. HR hemmed and hawed a little bit, telling me that of course I could speak to them about it. This was about their events. I pulled out my copy of the NDA, always safe contracts, and pointed out the exact clause and said that it clearly stated that if I violated this NDA, I'd be sued. So no, I couldn't talk to them about the position. HR turned to legal and legal pointed out that I was technically correct. They were a former employer and I was bound by my NDA. They fired me 17 days before the event. They didn't have time to start over from scratch. I still keep in contact with some of my co-workers, and apparently the event was a trash show, and the manager nearly lost her job because of it. Over half the speakers pulled out once communication broke down. All because I take too long to respond to emails. Oh, that's just the worst, isn't it? Like, it's clear that this company just doesn't want you at the company anymore, but they're too much of a, I don't know, insert bad word here, to actually just call you out and say, look, we don't like you. Because the problem is that you have to have a reason to fire someone, otherwise, you know, you're liable. And if you don't give a valid reason, for example, like this, taking too long to do work, or, lack of discipline, etc., etc., you can't just say, we don't like them. That's not a real reason. But hey, if you give a BS reason like this one, then yeah, I expect OP to do what they did. Again, great advice, like know your contract and everything. Most people don't, but still, just absolutely put them back in the mud where they belong to be. It's a shame because it sounds like you were very good at your job and you knew what you were doing. You were under a lot of pressure just working on stuff on your own, but you were still managing to do the job well. But now without you, just because they don't like you a little bit for whatever reason, they're screwed. Tough. You can sue me. I'm used to it. Okay. This happened a few years ago in 2016. At the time, I was working for Company X in a pretty new industry, think less than 10 years, which means that there wasn't a lot of rules and laws yet. I don't want to give too many details just in case. Most of the people working in that industry were passionate and willing to work for free. That's how I started initially, as a writer for another company, until Company X recruited me. See, because that industry was new and mostly consisted of passionate people, it was also mostly built by friends, with barely any knowledge about how to run a business. It worked because people loved it, but it had a lot of problems. Most of all, everything to do with contracts, paying people, and anything HR. The little startup I was working for was no exception, and I got hired under a specific contract that was supposed to be used for people working for a short time period, not a long-term contract. I was okay with that at first. It was one of my first jobs, and I didn't know any better, but I soon realized it was a way of paying less company tax, and that the CEO kept lying to us. We were all under the same contract, promising we could get a real contract next month, every month. Then came the time when I stopped getting paid. And that made me angry. Well, I'm not surprised. I lived in an expensive city and was paid minimum wage on a trashy contract, so passion had its limits. I borrowed money from my boyfriend to make ends meet, and the CEO was using some of the company's money to pay for drinks too when he was out with his closest friends in the company. After 4 months of asking for my money and never seeing it coming, I went to the CEO and told him that I would sue if they didn't pay by the end of the month. Also that I was quitting at the same time too. He replied, "Go ahead, sue me. I'm used to it and I'm not scared. You won't win." That got me so angry that I resorted to suing. Little did he know, everyone was fed up with the situation, and I knew nobody had ever sued him, so I knew what he said was a tactic to deter me. I did my homework, forwarded emails to myself proving that I was owed money, that my contract should be requalified as long-term because it was hidden work, and asked for a large sum as compensation. When they got served, they paid me the 4 missing months immediately, asking me to drop all other charges. I said, F you. After just under 10 months, not that long when it's legal stuff with lawyers, etc., they folded. I got my lawyer's fees paid by them, as well as a substantial sum of money. I was able to pay back my boyfriend with a small bonus and put some money aside too. Most of all, it scared them so much they hired some real staff to do the accounting, changed other employees' contracts to long-term to make sure they wouldn't sue either, and now I hear that people are paid in time, which is my greatest reward. Many employees actually thank me for suing them because of how it improved their own conditions. I now work in a different industry with a real contract, and I make 4 times what I used to make. So even though I'm pretty much banned from that industry, I'm totally fine with it, and better off now. Don't tell me to sue you when you're wrong, because I will. I mean, seriously, how good is that? What are you gonna do? Sue me? Yeah, I am. And I'm going to do it properly and legally and going to absolutely destroy a company. And actually, in the meantime, help out loads of other employees who are getting absolutely shafted by you. It's brilliant. It really is. Ask me to do something, I'm going to do it. Genuinely, though, 4 months of not being paid is actually crazy. Like, yeah, you had to sue in that situation. It's just ridiculous. 4 months of not being paid? I'm not sure I would have kept going after 1 month, to be honest. But you did the right thing, quitting. Obviously, you're doing really well for yourself now, OP. And the thing that is so good about this is you've helped out so many people and you've destroyed some horrible people. So yeah, again, well done. Now moving on to our second story of malicious compliance. Sure, I'll keep my meals under $30 as per the policy. I'll make sure it's $30 every single time. I do a lot of fly-in, fly-out travel for my job. Usually, I'm so busy with work while on site, or I'm stationed somewhere with food options I don't want to waste my calories on, and I don't eat anything the whole day, or just buy a coffee. Our employee expenses policy at work is $30 a day, which is mostly fine. But there are some high cost of living cities, and sometimes my meals go above that policy. because there aren't that many options, especially if I want to eat healthy, which is important when you're constantly on the road. Plus, so many airports have completely shut down their food courts and haven't reopened them yet, so there's hardly any options but fast food. So I submit my expenses one month, and I've gone $1.50 over the daily limit. Because I treated myself to a coffee that morning, as well as a lunch. I was tired after the god-awful early flight I had to take. The company had recently changed their policy, and now a different set of people are approving expenses. The previous people didn't mind me going over by a few bucks because it balances out with trips where I didn't eat anything. But this new group are absolute sticklers and rejected the expense, citing that I was over the daily limits. I tried to argue I had 10 other visits that month in which I didn't eat a single thing, but they still weren't budging. It really left a sour taste in my mouth. Now, every single visit, I force myself to spend as close to $30 as I can, because screw them. My husband is happy because it means I now bring back, slightly squished but free, food for him. I feel bad for wasting food, but often I just buy a meal and eat a few bites and then throw it in the bin. However, the expense policy is $30 a day, and by God, I'm going to stick to it now. While in the past, I might have billed $100 for the entire month because I didn't bother to eat, I'm now billing twice or 3 times that. I also used to push myself to keep working all day, but now I religiously take my 30 minutes to go and buy some food. So that's 30 minutes less work they're getting from me too. Yeah, I just do not even understand this strategy at all. It makes 0 sense to me. What is like an extra $1 or 2 to the company? Like if you go over the $30 budget by a few dollars, who really minds? Especially when you're not doing that daily. But to say, no, you now have to pay all of it because you've gone over or whatever, even the difference, even if it was just a couple of dollars, and antagonize OP to the extent that he's going to go and do this, why? You're just making him unhappy, losing money. What's the gain from that? And also, I assume it's not just OP that this has happened to. If they're this stingy about a couple dollars with OP, they're probably like this with the rest of the employees as well and their lunch money. I don't get the long-term play. It's just weird, and it's going to make for a workforce that's just uninspired and ultimately annoyed. Great management. Now for our third story of this episode. We didn't break any laws. Sure, go to the authorities. This story took place back in the mid-90s. My wife and I were newly married, and our daughter was still an infant. My wife worked in healthcare as a home care nurse, traveling from house to house, looking after people. However, after our daughter was born, she didn't want a job that put her on the road so much, with shifts in the evening. So she applied to be a cleaner at the military base near our community. 2 things about our situation that are noteworthy. One is that my wife is a visible minority, and second, as a healthcare worker, she logs everything as a force of habits. The company that hired her was a national company. The base office usually had 5 employees. One had recently quit because her husband was moving with his military job to another part of the country. So the local boss hired my wife to replace her. The 4 other workers were tight. Louise was the boss, who hired her best friend Donna, Donna's brother Dan, and Louise's niece, Tracy. My wife was a true outsider. She immediately saw that things were not quite equal. Even though my wife was paid from 4 p.m. to midnight, she was home by 8 p.m. every night. She was also excluded from cleaning the buildings that housed the engineering and tenancy offices. Occasionally, when she would clean those offices, she saw her colleagues rifling through desks and filing cabinets, photocopying documents, and other shady stuff. My wife also saw Louise threaten a soldier with extra duties for not opening doors fast enough. Louise's husband was a senior NCO in the unit. But jobs were hard to find at the time, so my wife was willing to accept a little discomfort to her ethics. However, after a few months, the racial epithet started. It started with a nickname, then morphed into slurs, and then rumors about her. They started telling racial jokes without trying to hide it. When my wife complained to the 4 of them that she was uncomfortable, she got called weak, and they threatened her employment. My wife then told them that she would go to the head office. So, she called the head office from work. Stuart from HR dressed down my wife over woman's talk and told her that she needed to thicken her skin and not be too sensitive. My wife countered that she would go to the authorities. Stuart said, "No laws have been broken, so you should go to the authorities. Good luck." Later that shift, she was fired for attitude. So my wife went to the authorities, just not the police. she went to the Human Rights Commission and to the military base headquarters. She gave both photocopies of her logs. The human rights investigation determined that there was a work environment that tolerated racist behaviours. That garnered an apology and an acknowledgement from Stewart, with a smug comment that they will henceforth include a clause about racial sensitivity in their employee paperwork. He even made a comment to my wife that essentially this was nothing. However, behind the scenes, the base had been doing their own investigation. Some of the people whose desks had been rifled in the tenancy buildings have reported that they suspected they'd been snooped through. The dates of some of their reports matched my wife's logs on the date she was there. Louise threatening a soldier was followed up, and it was discovered that Louise's husband had chastised the soldier and arranged for him to do 2 weeks extra duties, a violation of an abuse of authority statutes. The contract with the base required 40 hours of service per week. The base pulled the security and key logs, showing that work was always done by 8 PM. The base was paying for 40 hours per day and getting 20 hours service. There was a clause in the cleaning contract that stated that federal government human rights regulations needed to be followed. The results of the Commission's investigation determines that they were in violation. Other bases were contacted to see what was going on with this company, and they found out others were having similar issues. As a result, the base broke the contract with cause. It was a 5-year contract broken after the 2nd year. Louise, Donna, Dan, and Tracy were suddenly out of work. The next cleaning company came in. All personnel had to undergo vetting for security. All cleaning was done during the day, preventing people from rifling desks. 40 hours was 40 hours, and cleaners were not authorized to engage soldiers beyond casual "how are you" conversations. My wife went back to healthcare. However, every once in a while, she wonders what Stewart thinks of women's talk now. I'm actually a little bit confused as to what's just gone on in this story. Like, what were these people photocopying? What were they doing in the desks? Who are they working for, really? There's like so much more to the story that we're not ever going to know, really. I presume for privacy reasons, obviously, and, you know, being secret and OP not wanting to actually disclose who they really are. It's so interesting, like, what could have been going on here? Why were they doing the things they were doing? Why weren't they just cleaning? Look, guys, if you've got any suggestions as to what might have been going on here and who these people really were working for or what their intentions really were, please do comment down below. A very interesting one. I don't really know. Like, sorry, the more I think about it, the more weird it is. They're photocopying stuff in a military base. That's like espionage sort of stuff, isn't it? That is so weird. I actually have got to know what's going on. Guys, comment your theories down below. Super interesting story once again. And again, OP, of course, she did the right thing. Medical clerk made me stand outside in 104-degree heat, so I staged a mini revolution. Now, Europeans, 104 degrees is 40 degrees Celsius. That's insane. This took place during the first summer of lockdown where I live. Some context for you. My town is basically on the edge of nowhere. We have a medical center for basic stuff, but a full hospital is 30 to 40 minutes in any direction, depending on where you chose to go. With that in mind, we get people from a huge surrounding area that go to our town center for tests, simple medical exams, etc. Maybe as many as 50 small communities use our center on a daily basis, so it is constantly busy. The center itself is quite small compared to hospitals in the city. The various clinics and a basic ER take up most of the space, with an area by the front doors for the public to sit in if they're waiting for a ride or someone visiting a doctor. It is that waiting area that is the cause for my story today. One day, during the first summer of lockdown here, I had to go to the medical center for tests. Some things to know about me. I am challenged with multiple disabilities. I'm legally blind, have significant mobility and balance issues, and a rather severe heart condition. As such, I use a walking frame and travel using the city's provided disabled transports. That particular day, I had finished my test early and had 45 minutes to wait until my transport was scheduled to return to pick me up. I figured, no problem, I'll just sit in the waiting area and, well, wait. I shuffled over to the seats with my walker, plainly evident, and was confronted by a new sign. Staff only. Say what now? I looked around at all the empty seats and vacant tables and turned to the clerks at the entrance. Can I please have a seat in the waiting area until my transport comes back? The clerk said coldly, no, it's staff only. You need to wait outside. I can't stand for 45 minutes waiting for my transport. I gestured to my plainly apparent walking frame that I was clearly leaning heavily on. Not my problem. There are benches to sit on outside. Yeah, but the benches are full and we're supposed to be social distancing, not cuddling up to random strangers on a park bench. If you want, I suppose I could let you take a wheelchair out and sit in that. And how am I to manage a wheelchair and my walking frame at the same time? Again, not my problem. If you want, you can call center management when you get home. Are we done here? I guess we are done, huh? And I went outside to find a spot to wait. Well, I stood outside for the 45 minutes while the sun beat down on what turned out to be a 104 degrees Fahrenheit day. Again, that's 40 degrees Celsius. That is insane. As I stood there, I noticed that there was a line of patients growing steadily longer, also standing outside in the heat, waiting to be let into the building. Some looked fit, but let's face it, nobody comes to a medical center because they feel 100%. Most of them actually look quite ill, and some were looking pretty faint by the time they got through the doors. By the time my transport arrived, I was badly sunburned, thirsty as heck, exhausted, and feeling more than a bit faint myself. My driver was shocked and insisted on walking me to my front door when he got me home to make sure I was okay. By the way, shout out to all transport drivers, you guys rock. The rest of the day was a complete loss. I spent it drinking water, sleeping, and nursing the burns on my shoulders and face. I was a right mess. The next day, however, I was fuming. I had plenty of time to recover and to think, and I kept coming back to that line of patients standing in the heat. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Cue malicious compliance. The words the clerk so smugly said, "You can call center management when you get home if you want," danced through my sun-baked brain like a mantra. So I did it. I called center management. What followed was a half-hour conversation with the sweetest lady. She was so nice and so upset when I told her all that went on the day before. She was especially concerned when she found out about the line of people waiting outside. By the way, that turned out to be one of the hottest days that we had that summer. After our talk, the manager promised to look into it and get back to me. Now, normally that's sort of a brush off, right? Not so with this lady. 2 days later, she called me back. Turned out she had spent the day before sitting at the clerk's desk observing things that went on. Things like patients being forced to stand in the rain waiting to get into the center, patients being poorly spoken to by that same clerk. And the cherry on top? At one point, a tiny elderly lady tried to sit down in the waiting area, and that same clerk ran over and rudely shoved her aide and snapped "staff only," with her boss sitting right there. The manager went over, tore down the signs, apologized to the lady, and helped her to a seat. Then took the clerk into her office for a chat. The results. The center was immediately restructured. Staff were moved into an unused gift shop, the waiting area was returned to the public, and best of all, the registry desks were moved, so patients no longer had to stand outside waiting to get into the building. I never saw that clerk there again. Now look, I know this isn't as exciting as most stories on here, but knowing I was part of making things so much better for so many still makes me happy. Dang it, I am proud of my mini coup. Viva la resistance and all that rubbish. Hey guys, look, maybe I've got this wrong, but I thought that people who work in hospitals are trying to help people get better, not make them worse. Clearly, I've not done enough research here and not had enough experience, but I didn't know that. Fair enough. Genuinely though, like 40 degrees for 45 minutes. I don't think I've ever done that in my life. That is literally like being in a desert, isn't it? That's insane. The only time I've ever really experienced heat like that for a decent amount of time was probably in Qatar, but that was like for 10 minutes of walking. Then we had to go back inside. It was too hot. But by the way, shout out to OP for actually raising this as a point. But most of all, shout out to the call center manager for actually dealing with the problem, because it would have been so much easier just to, you know, say, yeah, sure, we hear your complaint, and then just, you know, leave it like you probably would expect. But no, she went above and beyond, and now everyone's lives are improved because of it. It's brilliant. And now moving on to our second story of malicious compliance. Look at this for a complex title. Yes, sir. Just a little indication as to what this story is going to be about. OP has given us a little TLDR at the top. As a soldier, my unit didn't respect my sleep time. They do now. Devil emoji. About 15 years ago, I was in the army, and I had what we'll call a very unique skill set. There were several people in my unit with that specific skill set, but for some odd reason, all of the hot 20 to 26-year-old females got Monday, Thursday shifts and had Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, while guys like me got Thursday to Monday night shifts, despite having seniority over some of the ladies in both rank and time on mission. To make things worse, administrative staff like our commanding officer and platoon sergeants, our bosses, worked Monday to Friday and weren't willing to budge on us being active during their work hours. This meant that quarterly training, like PowerPoints we had to watch for sexual harassment, typically occurred both on my day off and in the middle of my sleep time. Given that I worked 16-hour shifts and the round trip to base was an hour, I was perpetually sleep deprived. Even if I got off of work on time and went straight home, I could get optimistically 6 hours of sleep per day between driving, eating, and showering. This went on for years over my objections. Honestly, guys, if I could only sleep for 6 hours a day, I'm sure some of you are like that, and I feel bad for you, honestly, I do. I'd be such a bad person. I'd be so tired the whole time. I need my sleep, man. I literally went nearly 2 years without a day off, concurrently with my wife, a day worker. Interestingly, the army did a study demonstrating that after roughly 18 hours of consciousness, you make the same number of stupid and careless mistakes as if you were legally intoxicated. Sadly, no one told my PSG, platoon sergeant aka boss, also Paris Saint-Germain. He decided that sleep deprivation just didn't matter. In fact, one day when I was transitioning from a junior enlisted, technically a specialist, but if you're not familiar with army ranks, think private, to an NCO, sergeant, my PSG decided I needed some NCO responsibilities. Reasonable. We were having a range day. We had to qualify annually with the M16 rifle, and we needed a duty driver to shuttle soldiers back and forth from the barracks. I was voluntold. Suffice to say that I was on loan to a certain agency, and I needed to put in an ops release to miss work. It was rejected due to staffing issues. At the time, there was no one else available that could do a certain thing that I could do. I told my PSG, and he informed me that the ops release was a courtesy. I was going, and it would only take 8 to 10 hours. But Sergeant, I tried to explain, I worked 16 straight hours leading up to the start of this driving, and I'd have to work another 14 straight hours at the end of it. On top of that, as driver, I'd be driving soldiers down winding roads I'm not familiar with in a van bigger than anything I've ever driven before while half asleep. Then, at the end of what would be a 40-hour shift, I'd need to drive 30 minutes to get home. Does that really seem safe? Safe? Specialist. Do you think the soldiers in Iraq right now are safe? As I said, this was about 15 years ago. Well, no, but at least they're getting hazard pay. You're dismissed, specialist. Alright, so OP is about to embark on a 40-hour shift in which he is driving. That doesn't seem very reasonable to me. So, I mean, what could I do? I only fell asleep twice while driving, and both times were at stoplights. I also made every single passenger aware of my sleep situation. Keep in mind, I was already sleep deprived coming into this, so they made sure to chat with me, bring me coffee, and do other things that decreased their chances of dying in that van. Around hour 38 of this roughly 40-hour shift, an important person swung by my place of duty to check on something. I was literally standing up, leaning against a cubicle, eyes basically asleep, with 4 empty quad coffees. If Starbucks had a size above venti, it would be quad, sitting on my desk. Per tradition, there was an NCO with the officer. I got chewed out backwards, forwards, sideways, upside down, and in dimensions I was not hitherto aware of. By military protocol, the NCO beside the angry officer did the chewing out. He threatened me with actual dereliction of duty charges as well. This ended with, "Now explain to me, specialist, why on God's green earth you think it's okay to sleep on duty." So, I explained to him that I was literally semi-conscious on my feet. I drank so much coffee, I started having heart palpitations and decided to stop, and that it was hour 38 on duty and I was simply at my limits. I cannot stress enough that important people cared about what I was doing. A lot. Really important people. At this point, the officer stepped in. "You've been doing this for 38 straight hours?" So I explained to her how I'd had to drive a van around during my sleep time, and this important mission had informed my unit that I was irreplaceable. But my unit decided it was critical that I, specifically the guy with the irreplaceable skill set who was working shift, be the duty driver that day. I further explained how this wasn't that uncommon. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd had a week where I was allowed to sleep during my sleep time for the entire week, uninterrupted. the number of silly things I had to do instead of sleeping was mind-boggling. "Who is your commanding officer?" I tried not to smile as I told her. "Carry on, specialist." Needless to say, by lunchtime, aka the equivalent of maybe 1 AM for me, I got a phone call. "Report to the PSG's office right now." I sighed. To say that I was sleepy was something of an understatement. And keep in mind, I got home around 8 AM and had to work again around 4 PM. The round trip to base alone would take an hour. Plus, I had to get dressed, be presentable, and deal with their nonsense. Then undress again afterwards, then dressed again, and drive back. "Please explain to me why the Command Sergeant Major just chewed me out over our in-house scheduling decisions." So I told him what happened. "Wait, you told him that? What, should I have lied to my mission commander about my level of readiness, Sergeant?" He turned red. Like Santa's cheeks, not a Norse berserker. No berserker-like traits at all. Nope. I took a totally professional step backwards. He was about 6'2" and 250 pounds of NCO, and I felt like I was hogging all of his oxygen. "Get out." So I did. It came down from on high that our unit was to have 2 quarterly training days henceforth. No more waking our shift workers up 1 to 2 times per week, every freaking week, for administrative rubbish. Period. All missions were informed that our soldiers would be doing one of the 2 training days. Pick one. Happy ending, right? Yeah, that's never how it works in the military when you get someone above you in trouble. What's the nastiest, stupidest duty you can imagine giving someone that was stateside in a strategic unit? The urinalysis guy. For those of you that don't know, it's his duty to plan and execute urinalysis. This requires literally looking at your fellow soldiers' junk, because there are a variety of products that can fool a urinalysis, and the only way to, you know what, just trust me, it's nasty. Fortunately, there was a loophole. You see, the powers that be are aware of the good old boys system that develops sometimes in the army, and it's really, really important that the guy with the grenade launcher isn't also on crack. As a result, per regs as they existed at the time, and maybe even now, if the urinalysis guy calls a urinalysis, it takes a full bird colonel to cancel it. That's one step down from a general. That's right. When the urinalysis guy decides it's time for the monthly urinalysis, wake up, get in uniform, drive to where he says it's happening, and God help you if you've got alcohol or something in your system. To make matters worse, for them, a friend of mine, let's call him Kroger, had been punished for having alcohol in his system during one of their urinalysis. It was on his days off because he was a shift worker, and it was during hours that were duty hours to the day workers, but off duty for us. So, I had about a year left, with no intention of re-enlisting, and my unit had already been slapped down by angry people for mucking with me. Let's do this. Malicious compliance time. Imagine this. It's 11 o'clock on a Friday on a long weekend. PM, that is. Long for them, not for me. You see, shift workers didn't get holidays off unless we took leave, and I needed mine for family time, like Thanksgiving and Christmas, because without it, I'd have been working every single holiday. The mission must go on, after all. Now, anyone that's ever seen an army movie knows that Joes like booze, and anyone that's ever had to do a urinalysis knows that they can detect alcohol. Mind you, being a urinalysis guy is a big deal. You're on legal orders and everything, entered into Big Army's database. Between the time I began the formal process of calling a urinalysis and the time I would have had them coming in, roughly 3 AM on their days off, since they'd established the precedent that soldiers don't get days off whenever we complain about losing sleep to stuff like this, my orders vanished. To this day, I don't know how they did it. I suspect that our CO or some other bigwigs were at a party or something and realised that they were about to have to explain to a full bird colonel how half of the unit pissed hot in a urinalysis, which would have required, legally, that colonel having a one-on-one chat with me about why I chose that time, and perhaps a discussion about how the unit was being run. Yeah, they never gave me another duty the entire time I had left in the army. I never had an issue with another leave request, and they generally just left me alone. At the time, I thought it was because I'd made my point that I was sick of their rubbish, but looking back, I wonder who would have come up positive for what specific drugs during that surprise urinalysis, such that they were able to rescind my big army orders in less than a day, and in the middle of the night at that. It does seem a little strange to me, honestly, that you were given all that power, OP. I would have thought that, you know, drugs tests are a very important thing. Well, they are, and therefore wouldn't be done internally, maybe by someone else or, you know, their own specific sector, but clearly not. Clearly they don't mind that much. I mean, that just seems a bit weird. Like, imagine the blackmailing you could possibly do. Say you said to someone like your horrible boss, oh, by the way, you're doing a drugs test tonight at 3 a.m. and he knew he was going to fail. You've got him in the palm of your hands right there. I mean, you did, clearly. It's a weird one that would be an internal thing, but hey, yeah, guess you got kind of lucky that it was given to you. You know what I just want to know though? What was his specialized skill? He never explicitly said it. OP, comment on this video and tell me. And also, you lot watching, comment down below. What do you reckon his very unique skill was? I reckon it might have been party animal balloons. Who knows? Boss told me, if you don't like it, then leave. So I did. When I was younger, I worked as an engineer for a small company. The owner, who I'll call Jake, let me know before I started that I'd be doing about 10-hour days, 6 days a week for about 6 months, but that I would have to be flexible. Some days they wouldn't have work for me, and other days I'd be expected to stay a few hours late. This didn't bother me too much, as I wasn't too tight for money, and I didn't mind staying behind a few extra hours occasionally. I got to work and was told to follow instructions from the owner's brother, Steve. He was an arrogant character who always thought he knew how to do everyone else's job better than them. We butted heads a few times, but nothing major. A few months in, I found a new job, starting in a week that paid better. Later on that day, I had another disagreement with Steve. The situation was petty, but it's his response that really confused me. It ended with him screaming in my face, "If you don't do as I say, then you can frickin' leave." So I packed my stuff and left. Steve was a little confused, thinking I'd just fall in line. He was too arrogant to apologize, and I had a job lined up. Side note for people not in the UK, I was working a 0-hour contract. This means I get an hourly wage, but I'm not afforded some labor rights like a set salary, minimum work hours, or notice for dismissal. This works both ways though, so I can leave the job whenever I want with no notice. I decided to call up Jake, since he'd always been chill, and told him what happened. He told me he needed me, and I should just return to work. I told him unless he controlled Steve and made him apologize, there was no way I was coming back. He refused, so I told him I'll send in my final timesheets. 2 weeks later, and I've started my new job. I still haven't been paid for my final week, so I called Jake. He told me that since you didn't give notice for leaving, you owe me for lost product of work. He said if I didn't like it, I should sue him, and he recommended I should just take the loss and move on. This was complete BS. A couple months go by until I finally find time to file for small claims court. A few days after sending him notice, Jake paid my money, including court fees and extra. He actually called me up, apologizing for the confusion. He wanted to know when I could return to work. Now, I'd heard from one of my ex-co-workers that because of the infrequent hours, people would leave as soon as they were told they wouldn't have work the next day. Others would leave when they realized how much of a jerk Steve was. They'd gone through about 7 different workers in the time I was gone and struggled to keep anyone for more than a week. I told him I'd think about it. I managed to string him along for a few weeks before he eventually stopped calling me. The moral of the story is that if you think you're being treated unfairly, you shouldn't just put up with it. Your self-respect isn't worth compromising. Don't settle for being treated like rubbish, especially when you're willing to go above and beyond for them. OP, I totally get what you're saying. If you are in a bad position at your job, then of course, if you have something else better lined up, then that's a great thing to go and do and leave your job, of course. But for the majority of people, I think it's a little bit easier said than done because I don't know about you, but I doubt that the majority of people in work have another job just lined up ready to go so that they can leave their first one. So although it's great for you to go and get a new job and, you know, have much better hours and get off that, you know, 0 hours contracts and all that stuff, which is great. I think for most people, it would be a little bit harder than that. But hey, you still did a great job, so props to you. And now moving on to our second story. Keep bowling. The pro shop will fix it? Okay. I had forgotten about this until recently and thought I would share. I think it fits in here. It's not a huge thing, but it resulted in me getting something I wanted but couldn't afford. and then winning money with it. When I was younger and through my early to mid-adult years, I was an avid bowler. 200 plus average back when that actually meant you were good, before the bowling ball technology boom which comes into play here. And I worked at the local bowling centre from the time I was 16 through to 21 or so, and then again later on in my early 20s, working the back, pin setters, front of house, etc. So I knew how things operated, what could go wrong, etc. I was bowling at a different centre one day. The first frame, after each shot, my ball came back with a small nick out of it. Nothing major, but yeah. So I put that ball away and brought out an old ball that I never used but was in one of my bags. Next 2 or 3 shots, another nick each time. Fourth frame, it finally came back with a fairly large chunk taken out of it. Usually, that means there is a nail or a screw that has worked its way loose, and the ball is catching on it, or a piece of metal has broken near the ball lift and is cutting into it. I take the ball up to the counter and tell the manager, and show him what had happened. Now, I was only 4 frames into the game, and said I would move, and he said no, they couldn't move me as they had a party coming in, and no lanes were available. He said to just keep bowling, and that the pro shop will repair the ball. I asked if he was sure. He said, yep, he'll go in and tell them to fix it and the centre would pay for it. Most pro shops are individually owned and operated. The owner rents the space from the centre. This was no exception. Now, having done simple pro shop work before, I know for a fact there is no way it can be fixed if I keep bowling with it, and this keeps happening. One gouge can be repaired fairly easily, as long as it's not in the track of the ball. The track is the contact point where your ball rolls down the lane, so anything in that line just can't be fixed and will throw off the ball as it rolls, since it can't be perfectly rounded back. Depending on the core of the ball and how you throw it, the track can be 3 to 4 inches wide as the ball flares going down the lane. But massive multiple gouges all over the place, nope. So I keep bowling, 2 or 3 games, knowing that I am getting a new bowling ball out of this. Of course, the huge chunks keep coming out of the ball. I get finished and there probably isn't a 2 inch by 2 inch section of the ball that isn't damaged. I take the ball into the pro shop and the conversation goes like this. The pro shop guy says, "What the heck happened to this ball? Did it get hung up in the pin setter or something? The lane I was on damaged it each time I threw it. The manager said that you would fix it." "Well, why did you keep bowling? I can't fix this." "Well, the manager told me to keep bowling, even after I showed him the first gouge." The pro shop guy then calls in the manager of the centre. "I know you said he was bringing in a damaged ball, but did you tell him to keep bowling after you saw the damage?" "Yeah, we couldn't move him, so I told him to just bowl out his games and you would fix it," said the centre manager. "I can't fix this. You're gonna have to replace his ball." The manager was shocked. "What?" Cue a bunch of arguing back and forth about why it can't be fixed. The ball I have they don't carry, etc. "Fine, replace it with anything on the wall except for the Excalibur." The Excalibur was almost 50% more expensive than regular bowling balls. It was the first reactive resin ball on the market. Reactive resin is a compound that made the ball hook much, much more than a traditional urethane ball. It revolutionized the game, and ruined it, according to some, since it allowed average or below average bowlers to suddenly improve drastically due to not having to be anywhere near as accurate, and it took a lot of the skill from the game. But I digress. "So I can pick any ball other than the Excalibur and you will pay for it, drilling and all?" I say. "Yes," said the manager. "Okay, thanks." And the manager leaves. "Can I have store credit for that ball on the wall, but then apply it to the Excalibur and I'll pay the difference?" "Sure, we can do that." And the pro shop guy then proceeds to measure my hand and drills the ball. And I pay like $40 for what was then between a $150 to $200 ball that I could not have afforded at the time. I bowled my second ever 300 game with it less than a month later and won 2 centre tournaments with it and a bunch of high game pot money during league play. That ball paid for itself 10 times over in the first 2 months. Again, OP, a very well done to you for getting an insane deal out of that, but I just don't really get what the manager was ever thinking was going to happen there. I mean, he could see the gouges that were happening after just a few frames. It was like, you know what? I can't bother to sort all this admin out and have this person switch frames and ruin my big old party. Just destroy the ball. Was that ever a good idea? I don't really know. To be honest, reading this story just really makes me want to go bowling again because I've not been in so long and it's so good. That's the main takeaway from that. I mean, I'd rather not have my ball get broken, but hey, I wouldn't have my own ball. But yeah, the thing is, like, with this manager, your OP has taken his own balls, right, to bowl with. Otherwise, they wouldn't really care if it was, you know, getting gouged a little bit because it's the center's ball anyway. But it's his own ball. He's obviously gonna care if it gets broken and he's gonna want to get it fixed. Surely deal with it at the point that it's getting broken and not wait till it gets completely destroyed before fixing it. I don't know. That's just what I would do if I was manager of a bowling center. But hey, that's me. Is this the hottest wing you have? I used to own a wing joint. Nothing fancy, but a good selection of wing flavors and beer. Inevitably, we would have people come in and order the hottest wings I had. I like super spicy foods, so these were pretty dang hot. Of those people, about 5 to 10% would always start the joke or sarcastic conversation, "These aren't that hot. Can't you do better?" Yuck, yuck, yuck. One of my best regulars, a dentist who fancied himself a gardener, decided to help us out and planted a ghost pepper bush, at the time the hottest pepper in the world, and he could bring us the bounty of his harvest. Now, he would intentionally underwater the bush so the peppers would be as hot as they could be. When he would bring us the peppers, I would grind them, seeds and all, into a nice paste, which I would combine with our hottest sauce and keep to the side for when our spicy wing connoisseurs would show up and complain about the hot sauce not being hot enough. I would only serve them one death head wing, it seemed a fitting name. I would make them wear gloves to eat it to prevent capsaicin burns on their skin. I would specifically tell them about the heat they were about to get into, trying to dissuade them from eating this culinary monstrosity. By the time we got through all of this, every single person always now viewed this as an insult to their manhood. Never had a woman complain about heat, but would sometimes actually ask if there was another level they could try, and they could not be stopped from eating this wing. So they did. Now, the fun thing about capsaicin oil is it can often take a few seconds to kick, usually just enough time for the person to scarf down the wing and start to smugly tell us how it wasn't that hot. And then the heat would begin. And once it started, it was relentless. Now, the wing was free, but the cup of milk after was $20. I never had a single person ask for a second one. Yeah, guys, to be honest, that doesn't really surprise me that only men have done this because, you know, you do get some men that have massive egos and they'll hear hot wing and they'll see it as a challenge and they'll just say, you know what, give me your hottest wing. Well, you asked for our very hottest wing, try and handle this bad boy. You can just picture their faces, can't you? They take a bite, they're thinking to themselves, hot? This is barely anything. Then the heat sets in and they're like, oh snap, I'm in the mud here, I'm in massive trouble. And then you just have a very enjoyable rest of your day leading up until you go to the toilet. Wow, that must be pretty incredible. Now moving on to our second story. You can't continue working from home because you go idle in chat too often. As part of the plan to return to office post-COVID, my company has done a lot of redesignating of who can permanently work from home, who can hybrid, etc. I really wanted to work from home full-time. I hate the office with a burning passion. It's distracting, it's a long commute, there's no benefit to being there, so on and so forth. I'd just rather be at home. Well, when we thought that May was going to be go back to office time, they started giving out the new designations. I got designated as in office full time. It made no sense to me. I work on a team of 8 people and each of us is in a different office somewhere in the country. I've literally never been to an in-person meeting or needed to do in-person work in 3 years at this company. Every single other person on my team got designated to work from home. So, I brought it up with my boss and asked to work from home. When I started at this company and lived elsewhere, I got to work from home for 4 months before I moved. And the past 14 months during COVID, I've been at home. So 18 out of the 36 months at the company, I've been working from home. What I was told though, is that I go idle too often in chat to trust me working from home. Basically, we have a company-wide IM system that shows you as available, idle, or in a meeting. If you don't touch your keyboard for 5 minutes, you show as idle. So, they've decided to use this as a measure for who is working and who isn't. The thing is, like many people in many types of jobs, I don't have stuff to do for a full 8 hours every single day. The amount of work I have to do on a typical day takes 3 to 5 hours of actual attention. There simply isn't something to do all the time. My performance numbers actually went up working from home. By all objective KPI numbers, I'm a better worker at home. In fact, in the KPIs that I don't flat out lead the team in, I come in second. There isn't work to do that I'm neglecting or procrastinating. When something comes up, I simply do it until it's done, or until I can't do it anymore due to waiting on someone else. Then I stop. Now I've done that method for long enough that my work queue stays empty, because I work to get my queue down to the point where when something comes up, I can immediately address it and be done with it. But because I have other ways to spend my time in downtime instead of messing around online at my cube pretending to be working, meaning I show idle more often, I'm a worse worker apparently. I was told if it weren't for that, they would let me work at home. So what did OP do to combat this? Well, I wrote a 6-line PowerShell script that virtually inputs the period key every 4 minutes that starts running every day at 8 AM and stops at 5 PM. So now I literally never go idle. I do the same amount of work and I still read books, watch TV, and play video games on the side. But I have a shiny green check next to my name all day. That is brilliant. Because of COVID complications, they eventually said no going back until after Labor Day. I just had a meeting with my boss and he said over this time they've noticed I go idle a lot less than I used to, so they're changing my designation to work from home. All because of a little icon in some software. This concludes my TED Talk on why low to middle level managers are the dumbest, most useless do-nothing positions in all of corporate America. Yeah, OP, that's just absolutely brilliant. What a thing to think of. And I just don't really understand, though, from the manager's perspective. Is that really a way that you can tell if someone's working or not, whether they go idle or not in a chat? Surely you would base, how well they're doing based on what their actual output is. Are they actually doing the work? Are they getting things into you on time? Are they making a meaningful contribution to the company? And are they doing their job? Surely you wouldn't use a little icon, as OP says, to judge somebody's job and how well they're doing it and how much time they're spending doing it. That's crazy to me. Look, OP is completely right. In the majority of jobs, you're not constantly working for the full time you're sat at your desk. That would be incredible. Like, you could not work for 10 straight hours a day for your entire life. You would, fall over and die. So to actually, expect someone to do that, I'm not so sure. Honestly, if I was somebody's boss, right, and I had 2 employees, one of them was I saw completely working throughout the entire day, doing task after task after task, I would actually kind of worry. I'd say to myself, yeah, they're working hard, but are they actually, efficient at the work? Do they know what they're doing? Or pretty much questioning, why is it taking them so long to do the same amount of tasks that I've got this other employee doing that is doing it in half the amount of time? Honestly, if you're able to do your job quickly, you should not be penalized. That is the main point of this. And now moving on to our third story of today's episode. My meal must be salt-free. This story is from a dinner party I hosted before the pandemic. I invited 6 folks, and shortly after the invites were sent, I received a call from Sally. Now, Sally advised me that she was now on a salt-free diet due to medical reasons. She advised that at home, she cooked without any salt and gave me a speech about how wonderful salt-free life was. I was skeptical and advised her that I would personally find it difficult to give up all salt. Was she sure she wasn't just on a low-sodium diet? Sally advised that unless her dish was salt-free, she wouldn't be attending. Now, I was already annoyed at Sally for years of being difficult at the dinner table and restaurants. Trust me, for her, there was always something wrong with her meal, or its preparation, or the flavor, or the waiter, or whatever. So, with a smile so large you could hear it through the phone, I assured her that her request for salt-free was 100% going to be accommodated. On the dinner night, I prepped the meal. Sally was getting the same thing as everything else, with one critical difference. All of her food was prepped in separate containers, baked on separate racks, and seasoned with exactly the same flavors, just without the salt. Dinner time and my guests arrive. I have all of Sally's food plated on white plates. Everyone else gets grey plates. First round, appetizers. fried calamari with a lemon jalapeno butter sauce. This dish typically has salt in both the batter and the sauce. As Sally couldn't have that, I battered her calamari in salt-free seasonings and flour. Her condiment looked exactly the same, but was made with unsalted butter and no added salts. I placed Sally's plate in front of her first, and she immediately states she asked for salt-free. Now, I assure her that her dish is salt-free, and I made sure to cook hers separately, and even use a different coloured plate to keep it straight. We all sit to talk and enjoy the squid. Sally takes a bite and makes a face. "Mine has no flavour," she exclaims. All of my other guests tell Sally it's divine, delicious, best they've had, etc. I smile at Sally and assure her that her dish was flavoured exactly as everyone else's. The only difference is that she received absolutely no salts. It's at this point that Sally has a moment of clarity. It's painfully obvious on her face. She realizes she can't complain about the lack of salt, as she's already told the table about her salt-free life. She also can't claim it tastes terrible if everyone else is raving about the food. She literally looks like she was about to cry at the table. As my guests enjoy their dinner, Sally is slowly doing the toddler plays with her food thing and pushing her calamari around the plate. After a few moments, she reaches for the sauce that I made for everyone else. "Sally, be careful. The salt-free sauce is in the white bowl. That one has salt." She mumbles something about wanting to taste the difference before literally dumping the bowl on her calamari. She then exclaims how much better it tasted. You and I know that, of course, things taste better with salts. So this drama repeated itself over the main course of honey roasted salmon with pine nuts. I also am no heathen and had both salt and pepper on the table for my guests. I'm not going to judge you for needing more flavour. Here we go. Sally takes a bite of her fish and once again realizes that it has no salt. She reaches for the salt shaker and conversation stops. Another guest asked Sally if she was okay with adding salt to her food. She then says that she can occasionally have salt. She then proceeds to shower her fish with salt sprinkles. Now, I'd also baked some cookies for dessert. The dough uses a little salt, so I made sure to whip up a separate batch of cookies wrapped to go for her. Salt-free, of course. When I handed her those cookies, the look of defeat that hit her face warmed my heart. Dinner is over, everyone is happy, except for Sally. I called her the next week to make sure she was okay, as of course she's consumed sodium at my party. Sally then told me that her doctor had since removed her sodium restrictions and she won't need that accommodation at future meals. On the phone, I congratulate her for her good health. When I hang up, I laugh until my sides hurt. Salt-free life apparently doesn't taste good when the salt is actually omitted. Who would have thought? A final note. To anyone on a low or no sodium diet for their health, I commend you. But Sally was not actually on this diet. This is evidenced by her shock at how salt-free food tasted. I confirmed with her husband that she's never stopped using salt at home. Her salt-free claims were a ploy for attention that backfired tastelessly. Now, I think that story is probably one that you and I can both relate to. I mean, I've had it multiple times where, you know, one of my friends or someone I know will go, "Oh, I'm going vegan for a month," or, you know, "Oh, I have no snacks or no chocolate." Then the next day you'll literally see them going against that diet. And it is funny, isn't it? Like, do they do it for attention? Do they do it to, like, I don't know, make themselves feel better about themselves? Look, vegan diets and any diets like that are great, but I don't really get why you need to tell someone about it. That's my main thing. And by the way, I'm not trying to take anything away from people who are vegan or, like OP has said, people who don't have sodium or any other diet out there for whatever reasons, whether, you know, it's a health thing or you just want to do it, you feel better about yourself, whatever, it's none of my business. But if you're then telling everyone about it and then not actually doing it, so literally just using it as a ploy for attention, at that point I've got a problem. Like, what is your point? What is the point of this person? Like, seriously, Sally, why do you exist? That's my question to you. If you've got nothing better going on about yourself than to have this fake diet, seriously, like, get a hobby. Become a little bit more interesting, Sally, because at the moment I'm bloody bored of you. Do you know who I am? I've been reading many of these militarious compliance stories and it made me remember one of my own. So, when you're working a gate or any sort of security post, you get used to some of the same people coming through through and you don't really need to check their ID, such as your relief, the same delivery driver that's already come through 5 times on just your shift, friends and or family, so you just wave them through. It counts as like visual confirmation. Well, we had some joker that was getting kicked out of the military and he decided he didn't really care who was coming in, so he would just wave everyone through whether he knew who they were or not. Well, lo and behold, leadership finds out and rips him a new one, and comes down with a policy of visual confirmation is no longer an adequate means of access, and that we have to check every ID of every individual entering the installation from now on. So we figure it's stupid, but hey, rules is rules. So the day goes on without much problem, besides the random, serious, you know who I am, we were just hanging out, and us telling them, hey, I know, but policy has changed and it's 100% checks. And they realized, hey, you're right, things change all the time. Everything was going fine until base commander, a 2-star, comes through and we ID him. Do you know who I am? Why are you IDing me? Of course, sir. You're Major Jen Snuffy, base commander. Well then, why are you IDing me? Well, because the policy that you signed says specifically, and I quote, absolutely no one is allowed through by visual confirmation. So, after a few choice words about how he's the base commander and saying he'll make sure it's dealt with appropriately, we get his ID and offer him his proper customs and courtesies, and off he goes. Well, not more than 3 minutes later, we get a call from Flight Chief about how dare we stop the base commander. We are never to do it again, and we're just like, well, the policy says to stop everyone and anyone? Yeah. The policy only lasted that shift until they changed it to pretty much no one but the top select individuals, so pretty much anyone with a picture on our wall was allowed visual confirmation. Everyone else has to be ID'd. It still was funny to stop the base commander due to his policy that he signed and didn't think it could possibly bite him in the butt. Yeah, let's be fair here. If you're gonna make a rule that every single person who comes into the base has to be ID'd, then it doesn't matter if you're the base commander or not. You're gonna get ID'd, and that is policy that you just signed off on. You can't really have too many complaints about that now, can you? It's quite funny though how quickly that decision was reversed when the guy realized, oh wait, this is absolutely stupid. Everyone knows who I am. I run this place. You don't have to ID me, and also my other friends are in top positions, but everyone else has to get ID'd. Now moving on to our second story. Paranoid flatmate thought I was cheating her. This happened 10 years ago when I was studying abroad in Spain. I'd rented a 4-bedroom apartment and then advertised the other rooms, trying to find nice flatmates. The first 2 were great, but I was struggling to find a third one. There were some people interested, but I just had a bad feeling about them. In the end, I decided to accept this Russian girl, against my better judgments. She was trouble from the beginning. Always in a bad mood, always acting as if the world owed her something. She said many times she hated Spain, and I'm thinking, well, why are you here then? She always seemed paranoid that she was being cheated by everyone. For example, once she found out I didn't pay the same as the other 3. Obviously, I paid less. I was the one who found the flat, it was my name on the contract and all bills, I was liable for all damages, they weren't my friends, I didn't have a contract with them, it was all casual. So, she told me it was illegal to sublet and that if I didn't start paying the same, she'd call the police. I told her it was only illegal if the owner of the property wasn't aware of it. She actually found the number of the owner and called him to complain about me. Luckily, he's a cool guy and told her, I have my contract with him. Whatever you agree with him is your problem. I only know this because he actually called me saying that girl is trouble. Anyway, this long year comes to an end and we all need to go back to our countries. Before that, we need to calculate our final expenses. The way it works in Spain, they only check your gas and water twice a year, I think. In the meantime, you pay an estimate, and when they check, they adjust, and you either pay more or receive money back. To simplify the calculations, I've been the one paying all the bills every month. Then, once they check the gas and water, and we had the correct number, I'd be able to calculate exactly how much my tenants owed me. Trying to avoid any complaints from the Russian girl, who I was sure would think I was cheating her somehow, I made the clearest table possible. Every bill was attached to it. The final thing you need to know for this to make sense is that halfway through the year, a friend of mine found himself with nowhere to live. I had an extra mattress, so I told him he could stay with me until he found a new place. He only stayed for 3 weeks, in my room, but he's the tidiest person I know. So he was cleaning the apartment and would surprise us with dinners, etc. My other 2 roommates actually told me we should kick the Russian out and have my friend move in permanently with us. Eventually though, he found a new place and left us. So, when I was calculating the expenses, I thought it would be nice to just deduct €10 from what each flatmate owed me, to compensate for the extra water, gas, electricity he spent. It was extremely generous. There's no way his presence added €30 onto our bills, but I did it anyway. After doing that, the final total was something like €304 per person. I told them to just round it down to 300, thinking I was the most generous landlord they'd ever find. But of course, the Russian girl wasn't happy. She told me she didn't think it was fair that I was just guessing it, that my friend had stayed for almost a month, so I should recalculate it, but divide 1 month by 5 instead of 4. I just rolled my eyes like, it must be so exhausting being you. So I said, okay, let's do it together so you don't think I'm cheating you. She sat by me and we revised the accounts and voila! By doing it her way, she now owed me more. It was only like €5 more, but of course, I didn't round down this time. I had her give me every last cent. When the world is dark and I'm depressed, one of my favorite memories to go back to is her face as she was handing me those final worthless coins. Oh, that is brilliant, isn't it? When someone thinks they're getting cheated out of money, but in reality, you're actually giving them a really good deal, and they go back on it and they're like, you know what? No, I want the actual amount, the fair price, and it's more than they expected. Brilliant scenes. You know what? I actually had a similar thing happen to me at university in my 2nd/3rd year when I was living in a house with my mates. They do these estimated bills in England as well for gas, electricity, that sort of stuff. And we were paying way under the price of what we were using. So we had a massive bill. I think it was over £1,000, to be honest. It was an insane amount, which kind of shocked us all. But yeah, that is why it's probably best to keep on top of your bills and your estimates and make sure the estimates are actually legit. I don't even know if this is relevant to any of you watching, but hey, thought it'd be interesting how me and my flatmates lost almost £1,000 because we underestimated the price of gas. Let's move on. Now moving on to our final story of this video. Breaks are 15 and 25 minutes, and when we say... So some context. I work in the machine shop fixing the tooling used in plastic injection molding. Or at least I should. Half the time I'm on machines, helping/making parts of maintenance because they're half a crew down and the company won't hire anyone else since it seems to be going okay without them. You know, until the time it doesn't. Naturally, machines don't stay running just because it's my break, and machining jobs are often best done in blocks to help prevent screw-ups, so it's rare that I'll ever get on break on time. I'm okay with this. My boss is okay with this. The unwritten agreement is the later I stay to help get production going, the later I can stay on break, assuming nothing else needs doing critically. So I put off my lunch by an extra half hour, and 25 minutes becomes maybe 35 minutes. Of course, there's someone that has to ruin things. There always is. One day, I go late for my first break and leave less than 5 minutes late. The next thing I know, I'm in a meeting, being disciplined for taking 2 long breaks. See, there are a few managers here that keep the whole place functioning, in spite of the rest of them. A guy that's been here for more than a decade, who can run things perfectly and faster than anyone else, fired for being on his phone while he waits for the machine to do its thing because he's so quick he outpaces it. That is the kind of management we deal with here. So I decide, no more long breaks. I have to take the breaks they specify, sure. A month passes, production is through the floor and downtime is huge, waiting for mostly simple tool repairs. Get in there with screwdriver and pick out the jam bits sort of stuff. See, it's said that if you can afford the setup cost, you'll struggle not to make a profit on plastic molding, as it creates almost £100 worth of parts every few minutes. So half an hour of downtime there, another 40 minutes there, while I wait for an operator to come back and test it, because I went on break instead of doing the quick fix while they're here, it adds up. One of the managers, not manglers, decides to talk with me about this sudden downtime, and I mention how it worked before. Funny, now nobody mentions anything if I'm back a little bit late from my break. Yeah, I mean, from the outset of this story, this was clearly not a set of management that you want to be working for anyway. If they're only working with half the team and can't be bothered or are too lazy, let's just say, to invest back into their workforce and, you know, build everyone up to a full team like it's supposed to be, then they're going to struggle long term eventually anyway. But then trying to mess with it again and saying, you know what, let's take something that was barely just working in the first place, make it even worse, screw with the system, and expect better results? Nah, obviously not going to work. And yeah, OP, you did the right thing there. If you're forced to take a break, knowing in your own head it will, cause a downturn of the entire company, well, just do it and then let it all play out. It's not going to be your fault, is it? They know that they made a mistake and it was beautiful to watch. So yeah, well done. My dad served my detention. When I was a freshman in high school, I went to a school that was 30 plus minutes drive away. They had a policy that 3 tardies, with a good excuse or not, across a semester would automatically assign an after-school detention. I was a really, really good kid. I never got in trouble ever. Always really nice and friendly to everybody. I worked really hard at everything I did, from sports to studies. Even if I wasn't the best at either, I tried super hard, and all my teachers knew that and all had good rapport with me. Now, I did get a detention for being late 3 times, but my parents declined to sign the detention notice and explained to administration how I had zero control over when they left, and especially no control of road or traffic conditions, even after us leaving extra early to have a time cushion. I was only late by a couple of minutes on the rare time I was even late, but administration declined to remove the detention assignment. I asked my parents to just let it go and let me serve the stupid detention just to be done with it, or just decline and leave it at that. But they had other plans. The next day, my little professory looking social worker counsellor dad, with the big glasses, briefcase, worn down notepad, and his prized 20-year-old Mont Blanc pen, signed himself in to the school to serve detention the next afternoon, much to the embarrassment and discomfort of the administrators. They had a hard time holding eye contact with him and were visibly uncomfortable. They found an empty room to put him in and checked in on him once or twice. They even offered to let him leave early, but he declined so he would serve the full amount of detention they assigned, and wrote sentences for an hour until detention was over. To my recollection, after that there seemed to be a differentiation between excused and unexcused tardies. I don't know if that was for the whole school, but for us anyway. It was never an issue for me after that. But like I said, it was rare anyway to even be a couple of minutes late. At the time, I was so embarrassed. But looking back now, it's kind of funny, and I appreciate the point he was making in not letting me get punished for something I didn't do wrong and had no control over. Yeah, I mean, to me, that makes complete sense, right? It sounds like from the post that you get a lift to school with your parents, and obviously you can only get a lift at the time when they are driving the car. So if they're late, it impacts you, and there's really not much you can do about that. So yeah, OP, I completely understand where you're coming from. It wasn't really your fault that your parents made you late. On the other hand, for your dad to sit the detention for you just shows what an absolute legend he is. He knows it wasn't your fault that you've been late to school, because clearly you're a model student. You do things completely right, and you'd never be late to school if you were driving yourself. It's your parents' fault, and they accept that, and for that reason he sat at detention like an absolute legend that he is. To be fair, I wish my dad had sat some of my detentions for me back when I was in school, but then again, he had nothing to do with them and they were all my fault. So moving on. Right then, moving on to our second story. Accuse me of cheating on an open book collaborative exam? Fine. I'll report myself to the Honor Council. This happened about 10 years ago at my American university. I enrolled in a class that 2 friends also happened to enroll in, an elective for our major. The professor, whom I will call Professor Y, told us straight off the bat that our entire grade would be based on 2 exams that would be open book, and we could collaborate with anyone else in the class, as long as we cited that we did so. Additionally, it was the kind of exam where you could submit it as many times as you want before the deadline. Professor Y's rules, though, were that he'd grade easiest on the first try and much tougher with each subsequent try. Fair enough. Now, some background on this professor. I'm not defending him, but I do think this context is important. He immigrated to the States from another country, where women are seen as inferior, and the often expectations of women are to be meek and quiet. Maybe less so nowadays, but definitely more so when he was growing up. In class one day, a female student challenged the professor. He argued back. She admitted he made a good point, and he said to her, "You are very agreeable. You'd make a great wife." Now, at this point, I probably should have reported him for sexism. However, we all apparently let it slide. He was in his late 60s, he had tenure, so I think we all brushed it aside as harmless. Hindsight is 2020, of course. I'm female as well, by the way. Fast forward a few weeks into the semester, and the first exam is given to us. My male friend, David, and I did the test together. We submitted it on the same day. On the bottom of my test, I wrote "worked with David" because I wanted to follow the professor's rules. A few days later, we all got our first attempt at the test back. David scored the equivalent of about a C. Remember, he had further chances to improve. My test, though, had a big fat 0 at the top with the words "cheater" written on it. I was shocked. I obviously held back after class and asked my professor why this was written on my test, but he just started screaming at me. "I hate liars! I hate people like you! You're scum! You are a liar!" I could not believe what I was hearing. I was sobbing, explaining that he said, and it was in the syllabus, that we could work with other students. I asked where I had cheated, and the professor had literally underlined the first 5 words of one question, where both David and I had started off the paragraph saying something like, "The reason that we are seeing these results is..." And that was that. I asked him why he thought I cheated and not David, but the professor wouldn't listen to me and continued to insult me until I left. Now, my university was super strict about plagiarism and cheating. We got emails like once a week about the Honor Council. All the emails said that anyone caught cheating would be reported to the Honor Council and sit trial. So I went to their office and reported myself. They were all confused and were like, "Wait, you're reporting yourself, not the professor?" And I told them calmly that I'd been accused and given a 0 without any evidence, so I wanted to sit trial. They incredulously told me no student had ever asked for a trial, but I was following the university rules and I was confident I would win. Needless to say, my professor was not happy. At the next class, he pulled me after class and screamed yet again that they were his rules in his class and he decides the grades, not the Honor Council. I said that's not the university's policy, and if he thought I was cheating, he should have gone to them. Since he didn't, I did. He was livid and tried to pick on me to back down, but I didn't. We had the trial and I obviously won. At the end of the semester, I organised a meeting with the dean of the school and filed a formal sexism complaint against Professor Y. The dean, also incredulous, promised to launch a formal investigation into this professor and would be meeting with him to discuss it. I'm sure that nothing happened besides a slap on the wrist, but even a slap on the wrist was well worth it. I tell you what, guys, the fact that OP's professor didn't report the cheating, in my opinion, just shows that he knew he was in the wrong in this situation and that obviously OP wasn't cheating. Otherwise, you just report it, wouldn't you? As OP said, you know, if a student is caught cheating, then the professors or the teachers would normally report it because that's in the syllabus. That's like school law to do that. Obviously, if your school is, you know, very watchful for plagiarism and cheating and stuff like that, then yeah, you'd obviously report it. I mean, if I cheated in my school back in the day and the teacher found out or, you know, had suspicion, they'd obviously report that because that's the done thing. The fact that he didn't do it proves to me that he knew he was just, you know, mucking about and being really unfair, to be honest. So what OP did was absolutely brilliant and, you know, role reversal. Am I cheating? Well, yeah, I think you are, but I'm not going to report it. Right then, I'll just report myself and we'll find out for sure if I am. And now moving on to our final story. Tell me to drop the class if I don't like your rules? Okay then, you'll lose 5 students and your job. So, when I was a freshman in college, I registered for a basic English 102 course that doubled as a humanities credit. I thought, great, 2 birds, 1 stone, despite the rate my professor for this class being abysmal at best. A few things to note. I have ADHD and dyslexia, B's, D's, P's, and G's. So I have a hard time reading most times, but especially handwritten stuff, even my own. It's also important to note that I had an ADA allowance on file, meaning I get some permissions to allow me to take classes and function as normally as possible. These permissions included use of my tablet during class to write notes and about an hour longer on tests. Well, first day of class, the professor strolls in with the arrogance and snobitude of someone who thinks they're getting tenured this year. He starts talking, going over the syllabus, and says, "There will be no phones, laptops, or technology of any kind in my class. You will write all your notes by hand," which isn't gonna work for me. So I raise my hand and ask him if I can talk to him privately about the rule. That went over about as well as a lead balloon, and he starts getting snippy and says, "Anything you need to talk with me about can be found in the syllabus." But again, I said that I needed to talk to him and that it was pretty important. Finally, he just says to say it to the class. He doesn't have time to take out to deal with whining of any kind. Like, okay dude. So I say that I'm dyslexic and need my tablet to do the notes and read the assignments, and that my ADA permissions are on file and emailed to all my professors before class. He says, "Yeah, I saw the email, but I don't care. You can do the work just like everyone else. You're not special even if you were in special ed." The class goes deadly quiet at that. I'm absolutely shocked at his bold and completely hilarious lack of awareness and care for his job. I'm staring at him, open-mouthed, and he thinks he's won. He's got this smug little face like I've just been told, and there are no other options, nor is there any way he'll regret his behavior. One of the girls in class finally finds her voice and calls him out on his ableism and lack of decorum, but he cuts her off, saying, "If you don't like my rules, you can drop the class." So she says, "Okay," and pulled out her laptop and dropped the class right in front of him. And, taking the cue from her, 3 other students and I do the same, and we leave class together. I've never met this girl before, but she then asked me if I want to go to the dean, because honestly, I'm really shaken. So I said yes, and we go straight there, telling the dean of students what happened, as well as the ADA counselor. Yeah, I can imagine they're not going to be that happy about that. They took the girl's statements and mine, and discovered that this professor had pulled this stuff for years, but nobody ever wanted to get involved. 6 months later, I hear that not only had the professor not gotten tenured, but he was fired and blacklisted from teaching at the collegiate level. Well, yeah, and I should hope so too. I mean, he's clearly ableist. I don't know what he's got against people that have, learning difficulties or are disabled in any sort of way, but why? You've literally got an email. Go in your email account, go in your inbox, go in most recent, and the email should be there from the ADA telling you, that this person, your new student, by the way, is dyslexic and has to use an iPad or they won't be able to do the work. Why would you not allow your student to use an iPad just so they can do the work? I mean, seriously, it makes no sense to me. It's not as if you're saying, "Oh, okay, because I'm letting one student use an iPad, now everyone's going to go on their phones." No, that's not how it works. She's got dyslexia, therefore she needs to use an iPad. I mean, seriously, maybe he was just got into the end of his career and was like, I can't be dealing with any of this rubbish anymore. Not this rubbish, but he's like, you know what, I'm not even going to accept anything else to what I want to teach in my class and the way I want to teach it. I don't care if you're disabled or whatever you are. Doesn't matter to me. I'm going to teach my lesson. You got to deal with it. I'm going to, retire soon, get a lot of money, and I'll be good. But no, fired and no tenure. Unlucky, mate, but you deserved it. Karen demands to go through bear territory. Almost gets mauled by a grizzly. So, for a little context, this story is not mine. This happened to my father in the 80s and 90s. But I'll write in first person because English is hard. In the 80s, I lost everything I could. I dropped out of college, my father died of a heart attack, and my mother was somewhere in the wind. I wasn't worth the air I was breathing. As a last effort, I saved up some money to move to a different state so that I could start fresh. I chose Montana to be my new home. Because I didn't have a college degree, I knew I could only make a living with my hands and not my head. After a bit of looking around, I found work on a ranch. The owner of the ranch, let's call him Jack, took me under his wing. He taught me how to ride a horse, how to herd, how to do cutting, roping, and many other useful skills on a ranch. My goal was to have enough money for a deposit so that I could buy a house, or at least some land. After about 3 years, I had the money, but I loved the ranch and the folks so much that I chose to stay longer. In the spring of '88, I finally made the decision to quit. I was fully honest with Jack about what my intentions were. I told him that I wanted to buy some land to have a ranch of my own and potentially get married and start a family. Being the absolute champ, Jack offered me some contacts of people who were selling land. After some time, I chose a piece of land near Jack's ranch. I got a loan, bought the land, and in the summer, I started building my house. By winter, the house was done, and it was planned that in the spring, I'll build a barn and some fences, corrals among others. In the spring, it was back to work, and before summer started, I had nothing to do. I had a lot of time on my hands while I was waiting for all the paperwork to be done. And I wasn't going to spend 2 weeks sitting on my porch doing nothing when Jack promised me that if I would ever need it, he would give me a job. Now, I didn't need a job because of the money, but I just didn't have anything to do. So I went to my good old friend Jack and asked if he needed some help. He said that he could use me to guide people on the tours he was offering. His ranch is not only in the cattle business, he also offers tours of the pristine nature on his property. I happily accepted the job despite me not liking people, but still, it was better than just sitting on my front porch and doing nothing. The first few days went without a problem. But then a wild Karen appeared to brighten up the day. I was just returning from a tour when I saw this Karen in the middle of the field yelling at this girl who was also a guide. I didn't know the girl, but in my books, whoever makes a girl cry is an a-hole. I came over to them and in the most passive-aggressive voice I said, "Good day, what seems to be the problem?" And the Karen's wrath was now aimed at me. And she yelled back, "This female dog has no respect for the desires of the customer. Give me a manager now!" Now, I didn't expect such strong wording, but I kept my cool despite my hot-headedness, and I came up to the girl, who was now sobbing because this Karen was mouthing off to her pretty good. And I say to her, "Leave her to me. I'll take care of her. You go take a break and tell Jack that I'll be with this piece of work." She gives me a grateful smile and a nod and rides away. I go to the Karen and I say to her, "Mom, I can't get you the manager as he's busy right now, but if you want, I can be your guide in her stead for the remainder of the tour." She replies very politely by saying, "Sure, I think even the trees will be better than that female dog." Every part of my hot-headed self wants me to pretty much bury this woman right then and there, but I keep my cool and we head off on the tour. And within the first minute, what a piece of work she truly is. She behaves like she knows best and everyone is lesser than her and everything should be given to her. When we're about to turn around and go back, I give her a choice. We could either go the official route or we could return by the unofficial route, which is shorter, but there were bear sightings reported in the past few days. I tell her that the unofficial route is quite dangerous, but just as I wanted her to do so, she vehemently objects because she is the wisest person alive and knows the best. Great, my trap had worked. After about 5 miles on this unofficial route, she starts screaming and turns so pale that she's even more white than paper. In the distance, there is a grizzly. I knew about the danger that I dragged both of us into, but in the end, it was technically her choice to go that route. I tell her to make herself as big and loud as she can. I follow suit, but the bear keeps getting closer. It keeps growling at us. With every growl, Karen was getting ever more pale. After it gets way too dangerous, I shoot a round out of my rifle, and the bear gets scared and runs away into the woods. The entire ride back, she keeps yelling at me that I put her intentionally in so much danger. And yes, I'll admit it was quite reckless taking a visitor into a part of the woods where there were bear sightings reported, but technically, she made the decision to go that route. I stayed silent the entire ride as I couldn't keep a straight face. I was laughing maniacally in my head, and I knew that if I looked at her, I'd start laughing out loud. When we returned, she was shaking violently and was pale as ever. After I tied up her horse, she demanded that I get her the manager, and I gladly point her to the little building in the distance, and she storms off. She starts yelling at Jack, and I can see that Jack is trying his hardest not to break out laughing as well. I could hear that she was demanding I be fired, but the neat part was, I wasn't even an employee of Jack's. I was doing it as a favor for a friend, and thus, I couldn't be fired. After the Karen's tirade ends, Jack comes to me laughing like a kid, and he asks me, "How did you even come up with that OP?" I start giggling as well and answer, "Well, she made the girl cry, so I wanted to give her special treatment. I heard of the bear sightings, and it worked out well in my favor." He then asked me not to do that again as it was reckless, and I agree, and I tell Jack I don't plan on doing it again, but I had a plan if the bear mauled the dang wretch. My defense would be that I gave her the choice to go on a safer path, but because she was apparently of higher intellect than me, I simply agreed. Jack gives me a smile and heads off. Years later, my father would end up meeting that girl guide again. Her name was Abby, but nowadays, I simply call her Mum. And there we go, a feel-good story to start off this Malicious Compliance movie. I say feel good, obviously a woman nearly got attacked and mauled to death by a bear, but I also would have felt good if that happened because she's a horrible, horrible Karen who makes girls cry. OP, love to your mother. That was a pretty great story. And your dad is pretty awesome too.
Get your manager here so we can talk to you about your manners. Have fun looking for a new job then.
My company takes safety very seriously, to the point we have safety briefings on the regular to keep us updated. Yesterday, we had a talk on compactor safety. One of our big rules is to never, ever, under any circumstances, climb into a compactor unless it's unhooked from any power sources. It sounds like common sense, right? Well guys, as you're about to learn, apparently common sense isn't that common. After getting our briefing, we get our assignments and are sent on our merry way.
I go to my area, clean it, and pull trash. As I'm walking to the compactor, what do I see sticking out of it but 2 trousered legs? After the shock lasting a nanosecond wore off, I start yelling, "What are you doing, you idiot? Don't go crawling around in there." I know I shouldn't have yelled, but I was so mad. Well, Mr. Idiot fell out and starts yelling at me. "Don't you go yelling at me. Where's your manager? Get them here right now." Malicious compliance mode activated. I put on my sweetest smile and say, "Of course, I'm so sorry. Let's get my manager here." Mr. Idiot smirks and is like, "Good girl." So I call my manager over and ask her to come over. Meanwhile, Mr. Idiot is smiling like the cat who got the cream. I'm fighting to keep from smiling. I know that my manager, Miss Heroin, takes safety as seriously as I do. I've seen her reduce full-grown men to tears over safety issues. Miss Heroin shows up and Mr. Idiot says, "You should train your workers to not yell." Miss Heroin turns to me. "And why were you yelling at him?" "Because I caught him climbing into the compactor and I got scared he'd be crushed." In a nanosecond, Mr. Idiot goes from looking like a contented cat to looking like a scolded dog. After a sound verbal thrashing, Miss Heroin calls Mr. Idiot's manager. Within 30 minutes, Mr. Idiot was clearing out his desk, still smelling of garbage. And there we go, a wonderful bit of malicious compliance. The fact that you clearly knew you were going to do this the entire time is brilliant. It's literally like somebody call an ambulance, but not for me. Love it. Now for our next story of malicious compliance. Only do what is in my job title? Fine. Good luck paying employees. So, I work for a construction company as an inventory admin. My job is to basically schedule counts of our warehouse and input the numbers they give me for inventory. Then try to see what the problem is when the numbers on the last count and current count don't add up. There's a little bit more to it, but I won't bore you with the specifics. The problem with this job is that when you've been doing it long enough and are good at it, there is less work to do. In the beginning, when counting 1 rack out of 60 racks of material would take a few days, it was fine because I was always busy. But now that everything is in order, the entire warehouse can be counted in 3 days. This leaves me bored for most of the time. So to fix this, I studied up on our cloud-based ERP service that we use for all internal and external transactions and have become sort of an expert on it. Every single aspect of this company uses this ERP service to do their job. Timesheets, HR, payroll, accounting, scheduling, management, manufacturing, ordering from vendors, delivering inventory, etc. It all runs through this ERP service. So it's very important that this service is up and running perfectly 24/7. I became so proficient in the service that our VP decided to cut ties with our consultants of the ERP because I could do what they did, but better, quicker, and much cheaper. For reference, we were paying these consultants $5,000 a month just to be on standby if we needed them for some sort of problem that could arise from using this ERP. And we had to dish out more money to fix those problems depending on how many hours of their time was spent to fix said problems. Not sure on their exact rate, but it was something like $200 an hour, and they took weeks to fix anything, while I could fix the problem in time for my daily afternoon poop break. I never got an official job title or raise of any kind for being an expert on this service. The company just saw me being able to do it and let me fix things that happened, so they no longer needed the outside help. I wasn't too upset because it gave me something to do, so I was glad to help the company save money, even if none of that money fell my way. Let's skip ahead a few months now. We now have a new warehouse manager, and someone in the warehouse screws something up in inventory by sending a bunch of materials to the wrong job with no record of it being shipped. We're talking a $500,000 screw up here. In the same day, our ERP had an update that caused a bunch of bugs with our accounting departments. So I decided to work on the ERP problem first because the warehouse F-up is more of a delay screw-up and not actually stopping anybody from doing their job at the moment, while this accounting problem means our bills are not able to be paid. You can guess what kind of issues we will have if bills are not paid. The ERP bug turns out to be quite big and numerous, so it ends up taking me a couple of days to figure out, but I fixed it before any bills are actually due and decided to take lunch a little early to celebrate a victory. Crisis averted. The new warehouse manager storms into my office after I get back from lunch and is livid. Apparently, the bosses were pinning the blame on him for the warehouse screw-up, and considering he is the one who oversees shipments and personnel in the warehouse, the blame is rightfully placed. He starts laying into me, asking why I've not fixed the problem yet, yelling and screaming like a child. I tried explaining that I was fixing an ERP issue and have not had time to look at the warehouse problem yet. He gets even more angry and notes that it's funny how I have time to take early lunches but not actually do my job. That started to annoy me, but I held my tongue and kept calm about the situation. He then ordered me to only do what is in my job title and to leave the ERP BS to the people competent enough to handle it, as he put it. Since this guy was technically my supervisor, I had no choice but to obey. I asked him to send me that in writing, and he snarks and storms back into his office. 5 minutes later, I get an email stating that under no circumstances am I to work on anything related to ERP unless it involves inventory. Cue malicious compliance. I do nothing but inventory from that point forward, knowing dang well that we would be essentially coasting until we hit a problem that I would refuse to fix. Sure enough, not even a week later, I get an email from HR that some sort of bug in the ERP system was preventing them from accessing payroll to pay employees this week. I reply with an apology that I am no longer able to work on ERP bugs due to the supervisor and to refer to the ERP system help guide for further assistance. I knew the help guide was not going to help her in the slightest, but it was no longer my problem, so I wasn't going to deal with it. Skip a few days later to Friday. I checked my bank account in the morning before getting to work and laughed because there was no money deposited. That problem never got fixed. I hurry up and get to work, excited to see the chaos unfold, and what I was expecting was an understatement. When I show up to work, I see the entire warehouse staff of 50 people walking out the front door. I stop one and ask why they're leaving, and they replied with, "I didn't get paid today, so I'm not coming back until I do." I go into the office and see the warehouse manager in a panic. He has jobs that need material and nobody to load it onto trucks or deliver. I ask him if he needs help with anything, and he just screams at me to leave his office because he's getting phone calls out of his butt from superintendents of jobs asking why our material has not arrived yet. I pass by HR on the way to my office and see a bunch of the bosses huddled up over her computer with her, with angry and confused expressions on their face, I guess trying to figure out the problem. I felt bad for her because it really was something out of her control, but I knew she would ultimately be okay, because she'd been there for so long that they would never fire her. When I get to my office, I see the VP waiting for me there. He has a very annoyed expression on his face. When we get inside, he demands to know why I did not fix the problem in HR when she emailed me about it. I replied that I'm no longer allowed to work on ERP problems as it isn't in my job title. He has the most shocked look on his face, and he asked why all of a sudden I had a change of heart. I show him the email from the warehouse manager and I could see the dots connect in his head. He immediately storms out and I see him heading straight to the warehouse manager's office. They were in there for a few hours, but eventually he comes back to my office. He seems calmer now, and he asked me politely if I can fix the problem in HR and if I can resume fixing the ERP if needed. At this point, I liked the relief of responsibility, and I told him that I'd only do it if he put it officially in my job title, along with a raise. His calmness then turned to anger again, and he says, "I cannot believe you," as he storms out and returns to his office. A few hours later, he sends out a mass email that he's hired the old ERP consultants to fix the problem, and that next week, everyone would be paid for the money they are owed, along with the money they earned if they return to work. This one surprised me, as he'd rather pay over $60,000 a year to consultants than just give me a few extra bucks an hour for better work. I think he expected me to change my mind and just do it for my own paycheck, but I decided to wait because I knew how these consultants were, and if they managed to fix this problem in a week, I would streak naked through the office. Most of the warehouse staff agreed to return, but were still upset about not getting paid. Sure enough, next Friday comes around. Nobody gets paid again. At this point, it's becoming a real problem and the entire staff is becoming agitated. They have bills to pay. I even heard a bunch at the warehouse talking about some competitors nearby that they could go and work for. At this point, I even considered just fixing the problem because the warehouse didn't deserve to be treated like that due to poor management. Maybe I'm the jerk here for this, but I am severely underpaid and can barely afford my apartment. There's no reason I should do extra work for free. That same day, the VP returns to my office and hands me papers. These papers said that I would be promoted to a newly created position that dealt with inventory and ERP upkeep. It would be its own department, and he would be my direct supervisor. It also came with a hefty raise. All I had to do was sign and agree. I looked up at him after reading the paper and he had the saddest look on his face. Please, just sign it. The consultants said it would take them weeks to get around to fixing it due to the high volume of clients they've taken on, and we cannot keep skipping paychecks. I happily signed it and immediately got to work on the HR issue. I managed to even fix it that same day. It was just a simple problem with the permissions of HR and payroll in the ERP due to an update. Well, that was a truly phenomenal story and I loved every second of it. It started off pretty mundane. I was thinking, here we go, a lot of technological jargon that I'm not going to enjoy. But by the end, it was simply sublime. What a story. Phenomenal malicious compliance. The thing that just sticks in my head though is that this all could have started much earlier. In reality, there was no need for this entire event and chaos to happen for you to get that big pay rise and get what you deserve. That should have happened a long time ago. Ultimately, if you're doing the work of an entire company of consultants who are charging $5,000 a month, but you're doing it better and quicker, then you should at least be earning that money. It doesn't matter if it takes you 2 seconds. The point isn't the time it takes, just as the point isn't that you can do your amazing inventory work in a few days either. Time is not related to money. That is an old-fashioned way of thinking. If someone has honed their craft and is really good and experienced and is just very efficient and excellent at what they do, I have no cares for how long it takes them to do it. Just do it really well in half a second and I'll pay you the exact same amount, if not more, than someone who would do it worse, but it would take them a year. Yeah, that's an extreme example, but you get what I'm saying. Time is not important. Quality is all that matters. Now, if you don't understand that and you just think, oh, someone's not working that hard because it takes them 2 seconds, but they're still doing an amazing job, I'm going to pay them less, then that's on you. And that is a problem with your management team, clearly. And to be fair, probably is a problem with a lot of management teams in the world right now. All I will say is it's a good thing that you did eventually get that raise. However, you still should be pushing for a 60k raise, minimum, not the raise that you probably got, unless the VP did give you a 60k raise, but it kind of seems unlikely. Maybe 60k is a little bit too much, but hey, you are providing the value of $60,000 worth of money to this company, therefore you should be getting it. That's just what I'm saying. Nonetheless, great malicious compliance and fair play for holding off, because I know you would have been tempted. You said it yourself. You would have been so tempted to go, okay, I want to get these people paid now. I'm just going to fix it. But no, you did what you had to do, and ultimately you deserve the raise. And now for our final malicious compliance story of this episode. HOA tried to punish us, told us to stop them if we can. Malicious compliance cost them 16% of the annual HOA income, and the cameras are still installed today. This happened several years ago and is a multi-year long story. I'll keep it as succinct as possible. We installed cameras in front of our home that were looking at our vehicles. Part of the camera angles did overlook parts of 2 neighbors' properties, one backyard and one side yard. The cameras were battery operated and had a function where you could grey out areas that you didn't want to film. When motion occurred in the grayed out areas, the cameras would not be activated to film. The neighbors' entire properties and several bushes on our property were grayed out. We did this when installing them. One of the neighbors was a friend and had no issues with this whatsoever. We showed her the camera angle and she said she didn't really care whether or not we grayed out that area. We still left it grayed out over battery life concerns. The other neighbor's name was Karen. Not really, but we all know why I chose that name. Now, Karen was on the HOA board, and as you can imagine, we didn't get along with Karen or the HOA board. We told her about the camera and showed her the grayed out areas at the same time we told our friendly neighbor about it. It was simply an FYI conversation. We're not on friendly terms. Not an asking permission conversation. But she told us to take the cameras down immediately or we would regret it. About a week after we hung the camera up, we got a notice from our HOA that we were violating the bylaws. The bylaw in question, a nuisance to your neighbours bylaw. There wasn't a specific bylaw preventing placement of cameras, so this is all they could find to try and punish us. We responded with a letter detailing how we were not violating any bylaws or laws in general and asked them to cease and desist. We all know how these stories go though. They did not cease and they did not desist. Their first response? The HOA has the right to enforce these bylaws. Try to stop us if you think you can. These types of responses were, unfortunately, quite common from this board. We entered this battle with one goal in mind, to cost them as much money and time as possible. The HOA hired a lawyer specifically to fight us. To my knowledge, this has not happened to any other residents. In the following 4 months, we ended up costing the HOA over $4,000 in lawyers' fees fighting this battle. For reference, the entire HOA income was roughly $25K per year. When it came time for our official HOA hearing over the matter, we had successfully postponed it, thanks to an attorney friend, 3 separate times. There were over 100 back and forth emails with the HOA attorney and ourselves. Each one of those emails was a 15-minute expense for the HOA. And I was happy to follow up a follow-up question with another follow-up question if it meant the HOA attorney was going to keep billing them. Did I say follow up enough times? We didn't actually want to take this battle to court, so we ended up removing the cameras the day of the hearing to prevent being fined, even if the fine wouldn't hold up in court. The HOA decided in the hearing that we were guilty, surprise, surprise, of violating the bylaw. They couldn't fine us, as the bylaws don't allow a fine until after a hearing has been held, and the cameras were already removed. In the end, the punishment was a sternly written piece of paper on the attorney's letterhead, delivered via certified mail, that stated that we were not allowed to place a camera on our home that had the potential to invade a neighbor's privacy. Keep in mind, the letter specifically stated the camera could not be placed on our home. We left the cameras off of the home for about 4 months, until the annual HOA meeting. You should have seen the look on the HOA board's faces when I asked them to explain the $4,000 line item for attorney's fees that simply stated title searches, attorney fees. The board actually tried to hide the fact that they spent $4,000 trying to fight us over a couple of cameras by putting the fees in as title searches. Needless to say, that meeting did not go well for them. About half of them lost their positions on the board. The other half, including Karen, unfortunately, remained on the board. About a week after the annual meeting, we installed new cameras, facing the same direction as the prior cameras. Only this time, we installed a post in the ground and mounted the cameras to that post. The admonishment we received after the hearing specifically stated that we were not allowed to install cameras on our home and said nothing about putting them on a post. They did send a letter to try to tell us to remove the cameras, but a sternly worded response indicating that we were prepared to fight them actually worked this time around. I guess they didn't want to spend another $4,000 fighting us. We didn't receive any follow-up responses, and the cameras on the post are still installed to this day, over 2 years and running strong. You see, whether it be on malicious compliance like this, or entitled parents, pro revenge, literally any other subreddit on the internet, I've never actually read a story about an HOA that's ever painted it in any sort of positive light, ever. So guys, I guess I'm asking you right now, if you are part of an HOA or your house has an HOA board or whatever, I don't even know how they work, to be honest. I think my grandparents live on a street where there's an HOA. I don't really know. And I don't know if it's a good thing or not. Pretty much. If there's anything positive about an HOA that you know, drop it in the comments down below if you're watching on YouTube. Because so far, over the 4 years I've been doing this, I've not seen one positive thing. Does it exist? I don't know. What is the benefit of them? What even are they? Why are we here? These are all very pertinent questions. But again, with this one, like, what are they doing? Really? A camera on one tiny bit of your property that has literally been grayed out and your neighbor has shown you this? Why do you care? What sort of life are you leading to which you would actually care about this? If anything, it's a good thing, right? What if something was to happen to your house, you were being robbed, and the thief happened to go on just that one little part of your property that was in the camera view of your neighbor's cameras? You'd be thanking your lucky stars, let me tell you. Then you'd catch them and you'd get all your stuff back, and it would be a hallelujah moment, and you'd say, thank you, I'm forever grateful, neighbors, for having that wonderful camera. But no, instead you want to spend $4,000 for no reason at all. Why? I just don't really get it. Boss said no shorts. I work at an office that sells bulk goods to businesses that use them, like retail outlets, etc. Our office doesn't usually have a strict dress code, but we recently got a new boss, Arsehat, who is quite literally the stick up my arse. He's constantly yelling at everyone about basic stuff, like punching in a minute or two late or early, or being a word or two off the script during outbound and inbound calls. Dealing with him in general has made me hate the job more. As it's getting hotter, I've been wearing khaki shorts to work for the past few days, which is something I've always done for the past few years, and nobody has confronted me about it before, so I figured nothing would change this year. But boy, was I wrong. About halfway through my shift, this boss comes to my desk and realizes I'm wearing shorts, and is visibly annoyed. He mutters something under his breath and goes back to his office. An hour later, I was called into his office, where he proceeded to berate me about breaking dress code. He was fuming and ended the meeting with, From now on, you follow dress code to the book or you're fired. Say no more, boss. That night, I went home and read up on the dress code rules. There was in fact a rule against shorts, so I was annoyed, but I kept on. And then I found it. There is no rule preventing males from wearing skirts or kilts. Here is where I devised my plan. I immediately ordered a pink and white striped kilt online, as well as matching knee-high socks and a shirt. There was no rule stated in the dress code against any of this, surprisingly. About a week later, the clothes arrived, and here is what ensued the following workday. I walked in, wearing my new pink business outfit, and immediately the whole office is staring at me. And the boss who came in to cover another boss's shift in the morning was beat red in the face and yelled at me to go into his office. He goes on a 10-minute rant about how I'm a useless employee and that he's going to fire me for not following the dress code to a T. I simply stated, I am in dress code. I urge you to read the employee handbook. He ended up reading the whole thing in front of me, and I could see him getting more and more angry as he realized I didn't break any rules. I asked him, so am I free to go back to work? And he looked at me with a death glare, muttered something under his breath, and waved me off. Now, I tell you what, guys, there is not much more I like in this world than a man in a pink skirt. I've always said that. You can go back and watch my other episodes. I've always said that. In fact, I say it about once per episode. It's something I love. So fair play to OP. You're making my dreams come true. Ooh, ooh. That is so cringe. It, keep it in. But anyway, I've got to say, this is great malicious compliance because if you're not allowed to wear shorts when it's super hot, remember at school? I remember at school we were told we weren't allowed to wear shorts sometimes when it was like 30 degrees. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's hot, like super hot, uncomfortably hot. Same as in work. Like if you're forced to wear your blazer or something, or you're forced to wear trousers, screw that, man. Who really cares? I don't. But yeah, one last thing I've got to request is, can I see that photo of you in a kilt? Because I want to. I really do. And I think you will do as well. Perhaps not as much as me, but just a little bit. Let's move on. You want a man to help you? No problem. One will clock in soon. This happened 16 years ago. When I was about 20 years old, I was a department manager in a big box hardware store. People said I acted 25, but I didn't even look 18. As a young female, I saw my fair amount of sexual discrimination, but the worst always came from women. This is the story of one such woman. I managed the paint department. I had 3 associates who worked for me. They loved me as a boss because I bought them a department radio, took the shifts they didn't want, I worked Friday close and Saturday mid, so my 2 younger guys could have time to have fun on Friday nights, and the older gentlemen took early Saturday mornings so they could sleep off their fun. In trade, I gave the older gentleman his ideal schedule. My team was awesome. One day, I was in the department alone, and a lady came up and asked me where she could find the 5-gallon oil-based primer. I let her know that my location didn't carry the 5-gallon size of that primer. She told me that we did and said that it was shelved right there, while suggesting I was too stupid to remember. Her husband gave me an apologetic look. I let her know that another location had what she was looking for, and that it was in fact in that exact location in that store. She let me know how stupid she thought I was for thinking that she could mix up stores. Then she began yelling, loudly insisting that I get a man out there to help her because she wanted someone competent and not a stupid little girl. Her husband actually tried to step in at that point, but I just smiled and let her know that a male paint associate would be clocking in any minute and that I would be happy to direct him to her as soon as he is on the clock. I smiled and waited for Joe to clock in. Now, Joe was great, and I knew he could handle this or I wouldn't have put him in this situation, but Joe was also new. Yes, he was learning things super quick, but he still relied on the rest of us for help. When I saw Joe walking up, I quickly said that there was a customer who needed help. I let him know that she was upset and asked him to do his best to answer her questions. Joe walked up to the lady. She said, "Finally, a man." She asked her question, explained where the product should be, and waited. Joe calmly let her know that he had never seen us carry a 5-gallon size of oil-based primer, but he said that he could check with the paint department manager. She was happy and loudly said she'd be happy to get some real help. Joe then walked up to me and started to ask me about 5-gallon oil-based primers. The lady quickly walked up and asked him what he was doing. He turned and said, "This is my manager. She runs this department." The husband laughed out loud. The woman stormed off, and I bought Joe lunch. Wow, a super interesting story right there. The most interesting part for me is when OP says that it's normally the women in the store, the women customers, that are the sexist ones that demand a man's help. Interesting. You wouldn't necessarily have thought that. And yes, I now have said interesting 4 times. Interesting stuff though. Again though, imagine the look on her face. Imagine her internal monologue. Thank God, finally a man to help me. Go and get someone much more senior and let's get this stuff done. Oh wait, it's the woman that I've just pretty much taken the mech out of. Feels bad. Feels bad. What's a shame is that you just know that she's not going to learn from this as well. She'll go into the next door, do the exact same thing, be surprised and embarrassed when it happens. Ultimately, again, yeah, and then just carry on with her life. GG, Karen, GG. Shady boss lied about my position to keep me from policy allowed benefit for years. I found out and it changed everything. A few years ago, I worked at a big retail company and had for many years. Eventually, I went through enough grad school education to get my license to work at a higher level. Much more pay, more job satisfaction, more responsibilities, fancy title, but the job market was rough. I stayed on with my company to work in a floater position, where I'd cover a large area and work at all the stores within that area on a rotating but irregular basis. Eventually, I wanted to get a staff position, where I have a single store assigned. The area was huge, the furthest store being over 100 miles from my home, and that is exactly where I was assigned to train for the new role. It was a rough store. Folks in my position were robbed and assaulted at gunpoint. The neighborhood was very unfriendly. The volume at the store was among the highest in the States. Staff turnover was, as you might expect, extreme. Well, after training, I wasn't really being scheduled to float to other stores, once a month at most. I asked to be scheduled a little more diversely, since most of the stores in my area were much closer to my home and didn't require 4 hours of driving a day. Bossman told me that I was the only floater experienced enough to handle that store. I didn't buy it, but what can you do, right? Well, a colleague told me about the mileage reimbursement policy. Floaters working at a store more than 50 miles from home can file for reimbursements of mileage over that 50 miles each way, even including meals. So, I filed a few of these out and sent them to my boss to sign. He didn't quite refuse, but he never actually signed and filed them. I suspect as soon as I left his office at our district center, he tossed them out. Bossman tells me later that they must be lost in the system. Eventually, the same colleague showed me how to fax those same forms to accounts payable, bypassing the district bossman. So I started doing just that. One day, bossman calls me in a panic. He wants to stop my filing of the forms. I asked to be floated close to home, but he still won't budge. He needs me at that miserable store. He promises me he'll make me a staff role at that store if I promise to stop faxing those forms. Now, staff roles are a promotion and usually come with better pay and a few other little conveniences. So I agree. Bossman says that there won't be a pay bump right away, but that it will come down the road. That never happened. 2 years later, the situation at the store has become too toxic even for me. I asked to step down from the star position to be a floater again and be allowed to float to other stores. Bossman says that I'm already a floater. I never was in a staff position, but that he can't let me work at other stores because it's better for me and the customers if I stay there for familiarity. Floaters do not get scheduled to stores exclusively, so I'm being singled out because they're still desperate to cover that dump of a store. I'm livid, so I start looking. It took me months, but eventually I found an opportunity to make my dream career transition. I put in my formal notice, and that is when the fun started. Remember that whole mileage reimbursement policy? Well, I kept meticulous track of all my shifts, and there is no statute of limitations baked into the policy. So I started filling out those reimbursement forms to retroactively cover every single shift from the past 2 odd years. I skipped the meal part since I didn't want to go through all that effort of finding receipts. I had a friendly store manager sign off on them, and I started sending them to accounts payable directly again. I didn't fax them all in at once, but for each shift in my final 2 weeks, I faxed a few dozen in. We still have fax machines in that line of work, believe it or not. I figured, what do I have to lose? Worst case scenario, accounts payable declines the forms. On my last few shifts, I started getting the checks from accounts payable. Not added to my paycheck, but sent to me directly. Mileage reimbursements are non-taxable income, so this was all tax-free money coming to me. It must have taken a while for the charges to show up on a balance sheet, because a few weeks after my final paycheck, I got a call from my now former boss man. He wasn't happy. He got some big loss prevention manager involved, and together, they started saying I was breaking some rule by requesting the payments. They specifically claimed I was ineligible because I agreed I wouldn't be eligible in a star position. They then threatened legal action against me if I didn't remit the full amounts back that same week. But I had the email chain from when boss man said I was never staff and always a floater. I politely referenced that email chain before letting them know firmly that because I was lied to, our prior agreement didn't apply, and I was fully eligible all along. Corporate policy, as confirmed by HR, agreed with me, so I let them know I wasn't returning a single penny. In the end, the reimbursements amounted to well over $21,000, and I transitioned into my dream job. I could say that I would trade that money back for the time I lost commuting to that miserable store. Remember, 4 hours every shift, but all that pressure motivated me to make the best career move of my life. The great satisfaction of not only professionally surpassing my old boss, but also getting to tell him that his lies cost him way more on the way out is almost priceless. I also shared my story and method with many colleagues who were also being told wrongly by the boss man that they didn't qualify for this policy. OP, that is actually class, because not only have you made yourself $21,000 tax-free for free, as in you didn't have to work to get that money, you were just given it. Think of the amount of money that you might have also saved or earned other colleagues. It could be anything. It could be hundreds of thousands. In fact, it probably is. If there are other people in this company that weren't getting the benefit that they're, legally allowed to get, and they're then getting it, retrospectively, wow, this boss is in a lot of trouble, that's for sure. I mean, minimum 6 figures, I'd hazard a guess at. Probably, a high 6 figures. Who knows? It's a lot. And it's all because of you. I love it. Again, I feel like I always say it with stories like this, but I don't understand what the logic is from this boss. Are they just thinking that nobody will ever realize this? Nobody's ever gonna know? Just treating employees badly in general? I mean, forget about the money that you're allowed. Like, saying that you're gonna get a pay rise and a promotion, but then saying, oh no, we didn't actually give you that. How is that ever gonna benefit you? You're just gonna make your employees unhappy. They're gonna move because they don't like the work, like OP has done. So you're just losing good employees. Like, how is that a good business model? Hey, let me know down in the comments if you think that's a good idea. Personally, I think it's pretty shambolic. I was forced to eat at fancy restaurants for a month. Many years ago, I got put on a work assignment for months that required me to travel to New York City and stay every Monday to Friday. I was assisting a company manager with a project, and my hotel was near his regular office in the theatre district. If you're not familiar, the theatre district is heavily built for tourists. Restaurants are generally kind of fancy and expensive. There weren't really any quick and cheap options for dining in that area. The company had a generous meal policy of up to $30 to $40 per meal for travel expenses. Now, I did use that for a bit, but the food got to feeling too indulgent and kind of ridiculous given it was an extended assignment. Also, I was working really long hours and I didn't want to go and sit in restaurants. I just wanted to watch TV and sleep in my room. So, after the first week or so, I instead went to a grocery store on Monday night. I bought some basics for cereal, sandwiches and snacks, and some frozen meals I could microwave for lunch in the office. It cost about $60. I then took a few cans of soda from my hotel fridge to make room for my weekly food purchase, and returned them before checking out at the end of the week. And that was it for food costs, with an occasional meal out here or there. I did the same the next 4 weeks, submitted my expense report at the end of the month, and you all know where this is going. A lady from accounting called and refused to reimburse my expenses because $60 is more than $40, the max allowance for a meal purchase. I explained that had covered 5 days of food, but was told it didn't matter. So I then spent the next month trying all the food in the neighborhood. There really were not any cheap options. I went out to eat a few mornings, lunch whenever I found the time, and dinner absolutely every day. Now look, I could have bought a few installments of groceries daily, but the once per week shopping convenience was part of why I'd wanted them. It had also seemed wasteful for me to go out for an expensive meal every night for long-term travel, but now I've been told that was preferred by accounting to my grocery bills. The next morning, I got a call from my NYC manager asking how I'd run through more budget every week of the month than the entire month before combined. I explained the grocery situation and he thanked me and hung up. About 10 minutes later, that same lady from accounting called to tell me they'd pay my still not reimbursed grocery bill and any going forward, as long as the daily amount averaged for the week was under the aggregate meal allowance. I happily returned to a more reasonable diet. Yeah, very, very strange. I just don't understand the logic here once again. I never do in these stories, really, do I? But come on, if a guy's willing to go to the grocery store and buy normal price groceries that will last him for a week for $60, and you're saying no. Instead, 40 times 5, what is that, mathematicians? Pay $200 on meals instead. It's just like, why? Oh wait, what's that? You're spending more money because you're going out to fancy restaurants? I could never have predicted that. Stop doing that now. So strange. Really is. I don't get it. I agree with OP though. Yes, he did maliciously comply and I love it, but surely you get to the point like OP did where you're like, well, I don't really want to go out for every single meal and eat really fancy food. I'd rather just lie in bed or just, have a microwave meal at home or something really simple. It's weird. I just don't understand it. Let's move on. My boss demanded I serve all customers and fill all shelves, no matter how far past closing hours it was. So, my first job I ever worked at for a few years was a grocery retail store with several different departments, including a deli for lunch meat and cheese, which is where I worked. One night I was working a shift of 1 to 9 p.m. 9 p.m. is when the deli and other special departments closed, and we're expected to be done and clocked out. But the rest of the store remained open 24/7 for general groceries. It was me and one other guy. We had an especially busy night, and we were a little behind on our cleaning as a result. But we had our meat slicing machines already coated with sanitizer after working for 15 minutes to get all the little meat chunks and shavings out of every corner, as we were pretty serious about making sure those things were clean as can be. It's about 8:55 at this point. We're almost late to leave, and the store we worked for did not like overtime. If you were getting any amount of overtime, you'd get chewed out the next day for it, even for a little amount. A woman walks up to the counter and starts looking through the product, as we had a glass case filled with a bunch of types of our lunch meats, pre-sliced and ready to go for bagging up. She looks at one and says, "I want this turkey right here, but I want it freshly sliced." I, of course, look to my co-worker, and we both can see the 2 slices we have are still covered in the sanitizer we use and are drying. Now, as per the food safety protocol written on the bottle, that says to allow 20 to 30 minutes minimum for the sanitizer to dry after application. So I tell her, "Well, Mom, we really can't do that right now. Our slices are both being cleaned at the moment as the department is closing in 5 minutes, but I'd be glad to get you something here from our cold case." "So you're not gonna slice it fresh for me? That's what you're saying?" I replied, "That's correct. I apologize." Without another word, she walks away, and myself and my co-worker go back to what we were doing. And we finish cleaning and go home after about 5 more minutes, narrowly clocking out on time. Fast forward 2 days later, me and the same co-worker come in and start getting to work like a normal day. At about 3 p.m, 2 hours into the shift, I personally get called into the head honcho's office. The store director, as they're titled. I think nothing of it and head on upstairs and go inside the office and sit down. The store director hands me a piece of paper and says, "Tell me what caused this." I look at the paper and it's a printed out screenshot of a Google review for our store. 1 out of 5 stars. And a full paragraph from that lady of 2 nights before complaining that she didn't get her freshly sliced meat from the rude employee, and then describing me specifically. I explained exactly what happened 2 nights prior, as clearly as I'm typing it out right now. The director is getting heated and begins to cut me off while I'm speaking, asking, "Why would slices be covered in sanitizer at 8:55? You're scheduled to work until 9. I said, "Yes, I am, but seeing as I'm constantly being reminded not to get any overtime, I usually start cleaning them at around 8:30. The director gets even more upset and raises her voice. "I don't care. That's not how it works. If you have a customer, you serve them. And you better start making sure those shelves are filled before you leave, or you won't be working here anymore. Now get out." I'm pretty salty at this point. I go back down to the department and my co-worker asks what happened, and I told him. He says, "So they want everything done before we leave?" I said, "Yep." And without another word, he knew what we needed to do. 9 p.m. hits as usual, and our shelves are at the usual standard of half full. But seeing as we've been given a new standard, we decided to stay and make sure we did what I was instructed to do. We spent the next several hours past closing time, slicing and slicing and slicing until every single tray of meats and cheese was full. We had plastic totes in the big fridge full of cheese that we sliced that were wrapped up in half-pound blocks for ease of sale. So we decided to fill that tub over the brim with every single type of cheese we had available. We cut up around 70 pounds of cheese and wrapped it up in the fridge. We also had a Subway-style sandwich counter where we made sandwiches to order and also pre-made on the shelves for sale. We made double the usual amount of sandwiches and filled the shelves, as per requested. Not a single shelf had a single empty spot on it by the time we were done. After every single possible item and shelf was as full as it could be, we finally started to clean and close. It was around 3 a.m. when we finally left. The department opens at 5 a.m. We were exhausted, but our spiteful overtime venture made us feel pretty good. We got about 6 hours overtime in. They hated anyone getting even 5 to 10 minutes of overtime. We both came in the next day at 1 p.m. as usual, expecting complete retaliation. But nope. Instead, our department manager of the deli kind of saunters over to us and says, hey, you should be good to start cleaning up at 8:30 like usual. I think the director got the point you made. Normally, overtime would be asked to be taken care of by clocking out for lunches or coming in later than usual. But they let us keep all 6 hours of that overtime. They never said anything to us about overtime again after that. I accepted a job that paid almost double about 6 months after this incident and never ever went back to retail hell. I tell you what, if you're willing to work until 3 a.m. when your shift normally ends at 9 just for a little bit of vengeance and to do exactly what your boss has told you, wow, you must really want to show them that they're wrong. And hey, you did, so I rate it very highly. This is the thing with Google reviews, and you know the saying, the customer is always right. Well, no, that's just not true. Yes, obviously customer service is very important when you're working in this sort of industry, but there has to be a limit, right? You can't just make things for customers when the shop's about to close or when your counter's about to close. You're gonna get bad reviews, and you have to just take that. I think the play is just the manager to comment on the review and say, you came 5 minutes before we were closing. We therefore cannot serve you. We're not going to make new stuff just for you. And then potential customers, when they see those bad reviews, can at least look at what the manager has replied and they'll get some sort of context. But you can't then just say to your workers, no, stay open forever. Prepare all of tomorrow's food right now. Work till 3 a.m, but also don't do overtime. It's just weird, once again. Let's carry on with the stories. Chick tries to gatekeep my nationality. Time to ascend to a form further beyond. I am a 20-something British-American male living in a very southern and undereducated part of the US. I've been here for a while now, and generally, when I tell people where I'm from, I get a little pushback, because I don't really have as thick of an accent anymore. On to the story. I work in a small office. We have a rolling line of temps that come and go. Most of them are barely high school graduates or people with very little in the way of worldly experience. This is important for later. So, one day, they bring the usual parade of new hires around and I do my introduction. Hi, I am OP. I am one of the recruiters here at the company. I'm married with 2 dogs and I'm originally from the UK. Normally, this is just a throwaway line that I use as an icebreaker and it normally rolls right off. Until this wonderful young woman pipes up. You don't sound British. She, of course, left out the tea very purposefully. Sorry, love, forgot the coat and tails at home, I say, as I drink my Twinings. If you're British, you love that sentence. The group kind of laughed it off, and I figured it was a pretty open and shut deal. Nope. A couple of days later, word gets around that this chick has been telling a bunch of people that I'm not British and that I'm lying for clout. She said that I don't even sound British and that she is dating a British guy and knows how they act. So, rather than be a mature adult, I do the very British thing of malicious compliance. I need an intern to bring me some tea. Would you mind climbing the apple and pears and pouring me a cup of Rosie Lee? I started wearing 3-piece suits, a pocket watch, and a monocle I found at a thrift shop. I went Super Saiyan 3 British. Obviously, about 3 hours into the first day, my boss wants to know what's up. I tell her and she finds it so hilarious that she assigns that intern to me for the rest of the day. I kept using odd British rhyming phrases and sayings, and she'd have to keep asking me to speak normal. I would reply, "But I thought you know how us British people act." She quickly realized her error, and we've been cordial ever since. Nowadays, I keep my old red passport in my desk drawer, just in case someone pulls that stunt again. Hey, I tell you what, there's not much worse that you can say to a British person than "you don't seem British" or "you're not British," because that hurts right in the heart. Don't say it, man. Come on. I love where this guy went with it, though. I mean, like, the things that he was doing, no British person does. I mean, I've never met anyone that wears a monocle or speaks the way he was speaking. It's just good how he really embraced it and was like, you know what? If you say I'm not British, I'm going to show you just how British I am. Even jumping back 100 years to when people spoke like this. Lovely stuff. I enjoyed it. It is a little bit weird, to be fair, that out of nowhere, this woman was like, "Oh, you don't sound British. Are you lying?" Like, why would anyone lie about being English? It's a weird thing to lie about, that's for sure. Imagine if I was like, suddenly, yeah, by the way, I'm Italian. What am I gaining from saying that? Nothing. It's strange, but hey, OP, well done. I'm glad your boss enjoyed it, by the way. That's funny, and everyone can laugh at it now. And the fact that you now get on well with this woman is a good thing. Yeah, just a bit of a joke. I love it. Very good stuff. Don't want to sit inside, even though a storm is coming. Okay, this happened to me a few years ago, and I just remembered it recently. I was working at a restaurant, waiting tables, in a very affluent area on the Jersey Shore. We had our fair share of entitled people who were under the impression that if you throw enough money around, you can do whatever you want and treat people however you want. And when your income depends on their tips, you kind of just have to deal with it. The restaurant had an outdoor dining and bar area that overlooked the ocean with an amazing view. During the summer, this was pretty much where everyone wanted to sit rather than our indoor dining area. And for anyone who works someplace with outdoor dining, you know the one monkey wrench that can ruin a very profitable dinner shift. The weather. No matter how accurate the forecast says it's going to be, you can never know for sure. For the most part, we never had an issue, because if it started to abruptly rain, there would usually be more than enough room inside for all the people who were sitting outside to move in. It's usually a cluster frick to keep track of which table moved where, but we always handled it without any issue. Until this one day. We had a large party booked one day in our indoor area that took up more than half our tables. A 50th birthday, I believe. So our indoor capacity was limited. And even on top of the party, there were customers who were wary about the weather, so decided to sit inside also. More and more people came, and therefore more and more people started sitting outside. My manager did a quick assessment and realized that if it started raining, we would barely have enough room inside to accommodate everyone sitting outside. He told us we had to stop seating our outdoor area and to start recommending to our outdoor tables to move inside because of the impending weather, to be on the safe side. Everyone's weather app was saying there was a downpour coming up the coast. Everybody was okay with it. Except I had a table of 9 people who seemed fairly middle-aged and very wealthy. Margaritas with top shelf tequila, gaudy looking jewelry, etc, etc. Each end of the table seemed to be in their own conversation, not paying attention to the other. Upon hearing about the incoming rain, I go to the woman whom I thought was in charge. She had the fakest tan of them all, and I tell her, let's call her Karen, "Mom, I'm really sorry, but because of the weather coming in and our limited seating inside, I'm going to have to move you folks inside so you don't get caught in the rain." This Karen is so entrenched in her conversation, she doesn't even register that I, a lowly waiter, was talking to her. So I try again. "Mom, I'm sorry for interrupting," but she cuts me off exasperated. What? What are you saying?" I begin again. "Mom, I'm sorry. Because of the weather coming and our inside filling up, we need to move you guys inside. We've got a table ready for you. I can move all your drinks and everything for you." She snaps back with, "The only reason we came here was to sit outside. We'll deal with the weather." I realize she just isn't grasping what I'm saying, so I try once more. "Mom, just in case," and then she goes from 0 to 100 and yells, "We'll frickin' deal with it." She yelled so loudly that the people on the other half of her table heard. They didn't hear our prior exchange, but only heard her outburst and went back to their conversation. I assume this must be normal behavior for her. Alright then, she wants to deal with it on her own? You got it. So, I began to take their order. Filet mignons, a few lobster tails, expensive stuff. I put the order in, and I look back, and all the other tables had moved inside, because they were all rational human beings. And my table of 9 entitled jerks were the only ones out there. I heard the leathery looking Karen say to the rest of the table, "Wow, we have the entire patio to ourselves. What luxury." After a while, I looked inside and saw that the table I had held for them was taken by another party that had just walked in, the last available table. And just as the last bar hit the seats, I felt the best feeling I possibly could have felt at that moment. A glorious raindrop tapped on the top of my head. Oh, sweet glory. Within seconds, it went from beautiful blue skies to torrential downpour. Everyone at the table grabbed their drinks, a little watered down at this point, and ran inside. After they shook themselves dry, they looked around and realized there was nowhere for them to sit. Most of them looked dumbfounded, like a lost child in a supermarket. Karen makes a beeline to me and screams, "We need a table!" I reply, "I'm sorry, Mom, we're fully seated and on a wait for our indoor seating. Maybe one table on the waiting list, but a list is a list." "Well, what are we supposed to do now?" she hawked back at me, which led to me so eloquently saying, "Mom, as you said you would, you frickin' deal with it." I air quoted the frickin' deal with it to really emphasize that that was her response. And as I said that, everyone else at the table realized that was our interaction earlier, and Karen had dug their graves. I felt bad for most of them, because if they'd all known the circumstances, they probably would have convinced Karen to move in. But after she raised her voice and cursed at me, all bets were off. And as serendipity would have it, at that moment their food came out and we handed it to them. There they were, 9 people in damp clothes holding a Cosmo in one hand and filet mignon in another, with nowhere to sit and eat. The rest of her party convinced her just to get some boxes for their food and pay their check and leave. As I hand Karen the check, she smugly says, "Well, this will be reflected in your tip." To which I replied, "Mom, we implement a 20% tip on parties of 8 or more. It's our policy, and it's clearly stated in our menu." She paid and then left with their boxed up food, leaving behind their half-full drinks. Best $60 I ever made. Yeah, you know what? This Karen deserved everything that happened to her. It's just brilliant as well, like the icing on the cake, saying that she's not going to charge a tip without realizing that a tip is forced and included. It's so good. OP, well done, right? You said come inside, you tried your best, they didn't. What more can you do? It's up to them at that point. They refused and, you know, they had to deal with the consequences. Brilliant. Really, really good. What makes this story so good as well is that I can imagine the bill was really expensive. Like, you know, filet mignon, really nice top-end cocktails, and they're having to take all that home in to-go bags and boxes. Like, oh my God, what a difference it has been. Sitting outside at a lovely restaurant, enjoying a very expensive, good meal, and then having to take it all home. Like McDonald's or something like that. Brilliant. Well deserved. Now moving on to our second story of malicious compliance. Sorry, I deleted all the files you told me to delete. My job was to design and write software prototypes for individual high-value customers. If they liked it enough, then a real software engineering team would build the real products. Occasionally, I would run the prototype for a few months while the customer evaluated if they wanted to buy the real projects. Now, these prototypes are not a lot of code, but they do run with a lot of data. Even compressed, it can be a terabyte or more. Having done this work for years, I've accumulated a small disk farm of past projects, which can be very useful when a customer asks for something, just like we did last year, but with a small change or two. The company resisted buying hard drives for this, but it saves me so much time. I ended up buying 1 or 2 a year myself until I accumulated about 10 of them. Figure over $1,000 worth of external drives. Then, unexpectedly, management changes. New management thinks they can replace old software guy with a cheaper new software grad, and I'm laid off, with 2 weeks to train my replacements. Yes, it is blatant age discrimination, but impossible to fight. So I just went for a graceful transition to my next job. Except I have $1,000 of personal disk drives with old customer data on them. The company insists that no ex-employees may take any company data off premises and all files must be deleted. I don't want to just leave the drives at the company, but they insist I must delete all data before taking them home. So I offer 1, they can buy them from me. 2, I will eventually use them for something else, but I can leave the data on them in case someone needs it. Not good enough. The new manager insists I must delete all data and all backups before I remove the drives. Okay, that's what I do. 6 months later, I get a series of desperate phone calls. New software grad has been unable to build any new prototypes. Old customers are calling to get old prototypes updated, and the new software grad has no idea how to do that. The executive VP is calling to ask what it would take to bring me back to do my old job. Sorry, I've got a new job now. And even if I didn't, I can't just modify the old prototype because you insisted I delete all old copies of it. If I did want to modify it, I'd first have to recreate it from scratch. The code still exists in their source control, but the data is the heart of the prototypes, and that old series of 6 months apart data we collected is gone for good, no matter what. Sorry, you screwed yourselves exactly like I told you would. I hope whatever you saved by hiring a new grad to replace an actual experienced programmer was worth it. Yeah, I'll just never understand the need to replace somebody who's really good at their job with someone younger just for the sake of it or just to save a little bit of money. It's so risky, right? I mean, look, even if this dude hadn't kept all the files, say they've been kept instead on the company software or on, company hard drives, and the new guy had access to them, it's still clear he didn't know what he was doing, and they would have had to go back for OP anyway. What if he just said no? They would have been screwed. Obviously, that's compounded by the fact that OP was the one who had the files in the first place and since has deleted them. But forget that, it doesn't actually really matter that much. They would have been screwed anyway, and they would have needed OP anyway. It's just weird to me, getting rid of someone who's very good at their job for somebody that isn't going to be as good, or like there's a slim chance that they will be as good just because they're younger. Sure, eventually when OP retires, get a new person in, but until that point, why? Makes no sense. And I'm a young person. I should be standing up for this guy. Still makes no sense to me. And now moving on to our final malicious compliance story of this episode. When someone asks you to write your name so they can report you to corporates, do this. I used to work for a car rental company. I won't say which, but the name accurately describes the employee's daily experience working for them. Okay guys, if you can work this out, what the company name is, write it in the comments below. I'm going to reveal it at the end of the story, but it's quite clever. During my time, the company continuously changed policies regarding debit cards for rentals because of the large amount of fraudulent transactions associated with them. This caused much drama with customers, in particular with return customers, who hadn't been in since the policy change. Around the end of each school year, many people rent minivans or SUVs to pick up their kid and a bunch of their stuff from college. I had one such customer who didn't qualify for the rental vehicle she reserved. Per my training, I was not allowed to rent anything larger to her than a sedan because she didn't have a credit card. When I informed her that I could only give her a Hyundai Elantra, she became enraged. She stated that the previous year she was able to rent a minivan under a debit card, and I informed her that policy had changed since then. She refused to acknowledge that I was doing my job properly. I repeated company policy multiple times and did my best to inform her that I was doing the best I could with the current situation. She refused any attempt I made to placate her. My manager eventually stepped in, and he broke down and did the rental for an SUV against company policy. The entitled woman smirked at me and pushed a stack of post-it notes that was on the counter in front of me. She said, "You should not be in customer service, and I'm going to report you to corporate. I want you to write your name on this paper." Without missing a beat, I took the pad and wrote the words "your" and "name" on the top sheet, ripped it off, and handed it to her. Apparently, she didn't notice until she was in the parking lot with my manager and her husband to inspect the vehicle. When my manager came back into the office, he said, "Her husband, who stood silently behind his raging wife throughout the whole interaction, wants me to write you up because you didn't give them your real name." Then he started laughing and said, "But I'm not going to do anything because you followed the company policy and you did exactly what that dog asked you to do." She gave us a horrible survey and it tanked our bonus for that quarter, but it was totally worth it to put that rude woman in her place. Alright, so first of all, I'm pretty sure that the name of this rental car company is Hertz, H-E-R-T-Z, because I guess it hurts their employees. Well done if you got it. Nice little pun from OP. In terms of the actual story, pretty petty from you, but I kind of love it. She did ask you for your name and you wrote your name. You can't argue with that. You just can't. I'm not entirely sure if your manager should have let her get away with this, but then again, it does sound like a relatively new policy and she obviously didn't know. Her reaction was way too strong though. Like, come on. There's no need to start abusing you and saying you shouldn't be in customer service, I'm going to report you, etc., etc. But yeah, overall, some pretty good malicious compliance, and I'm glad that your manager did understand where you're coming from at the end and didn't punish you. Well, he did say no matter what it was. I worked as a dispatcher for a small town police department out west. There was always a bit of a struggle with our patrol sergeants, who looked down his nose at dispatch, always trying to micromanage our department and bully our dispatch sergeants. One day, he discovered that dispatchers were handling small routine matters, such as answering questions from the public and handling other minor issues that didn't require a police response. He was outraged. He stomped around the station for a bit, then issued a memo. It began with a condescending essay about how dispatchers were not qualified to answer questions or handle minor issues, as only fully trained police officers were capable of such weighty matters. He then issued a directive that an officer would be sent on any call received from the public, no matter what it was. Our dispatch sergeant just smiled and told us to follow the directive, that she was sure it wouldn't last long. As luck would have it, I was on duty that very night, and I guess I was living right as the call came in. Then another and another. A rather bright meteor had gone harmlessly over the town at a fairly low altitude. Pretty spectacular, really, but obvious as to what it was. My phone rang off the hook, most just wanting to ask if anyone thought it had fallen to earth near the town. Not really an issue for the town police, but, well, he did say no matter what it was. The radio traffic went along these lines. Unit 28, stand by for traffic. 28, this will be an attempt to locate. Advise when ready to copy.
28, go.
Be advised, this will be a greenish glowing object last seen at an estimated altitude of 3,500 feet, traveling in a northwesterly direction at approximately 1,500 miles per hour. If located, stop and identify occupants.
10-9.
At this point, the patrol sergeant, who's been listening in, shouts into his mic from his radio at home.
Did you get a call on this?
Affirmative, I reply. This station has received multiple calls, and per your directive, an officer has been dispatched. Cue the sound of a radio being slammed into a desk. The next morning, the issue was compounded a bit, as the responding officer also followed his directive and filed an official report noting that the object had fled our jurisdiction before contact could be made, and then recommended the matter be referred to the FBI for further investigation, as he had reason to believe the object had crossed state lines. Our captain-in-chief were laughing to tears, and our detective volunteered to go and assist the FBI investigation, theorizing it had gone to Vegas. A new memo was issued by the captain, stating that dispatchers were to have full discretion in the handling of calls and minor matters for the public. I mean, what a way to start an episode. You did exactly as he said, and that is the entire point of this subreddit. So good. The object has fled our jurisdiction. I need to go to Las Vegas and help the FBI. Sensational. Can you just imagine this bloke at home, listening in, thinking, oh my God, what have I done? Knowing in the back of his head that he is the one that made this all happen in the first place. Wow, what a mug you've made him look. Fair play. Try and stick to the planning and the correct methods. Sure, I will. I am a 30-year-old man, and I work as a cleaner in a school for special needs children. I'm good at what I do, and I take pride in coming in every day to make sure that both the children and the teachers that work there have a clean and safe environment to work in. Some backstory. Before I started working at this location in April 2022, they've had a lot of bad luck with hiring cleaners, as the branch we're in technically falls under specialized cleaning and not general cleaning. In the first 4 months of 2022, they've had 15 cleaners that all disappointed, stopped showing up, or were fired for another reason. This has caused the general custodian of this special needs school, my direct supervisor, to be skeptical of any new cleaner that comes in, which is very fair. Now, I like to give 110% at work. Whether that's smart or not, I'm not sure, but I like to leave my work knowing that I gave it my all. That is why, when I saw the daily and weekly task list and had done an online course on how to effectively clean, I knew that in practice, that would leave a very messy workplace, since not everything would be cleaned correctly. Imagine a desk of a child that has a single eraser on it. According to my online course from the company, that disqualifies that entire desk for cleaning. I won't be allowed to clean it. Furthermore, if chairs are not at the desk, I'm not allowed to sweep or mop under it because it's not the cleaner's job. As such, I've been making some really positive changes to my work schedule, daily, weekly task list, and the way that I do things to not only meet the minimal requirements that my company asks for, but also to go above and beyond, be flexible with the teachers, engage with the students, and leave a beautiful workspace. this went great for a while. Now, the custodian has, for some reason, been getting way more critical of my work. The smallest speck of dust mist or a small drop of coffee spilt somewhere that happened after I was done with the work, and he's blowing up my phone with texts that I need to do things differently. Or he'll tell me first thing when I come in that I need to take my work more seriously. This morning he told me, try and stick to the planning and the correct methods. So I told him that I would. Now, I started to follow the paper list with daily tasks and my methods completely to a T. Every half-assed method that I knew would leave the classrooms and the bathrooms in a horrible state. Trash cans need emptying? Nope, not on my list. One piece of paper on a filthy desk? No longer my problem. Spills in the hallways? Looks like mopping the floor isn't on today's task list. Sorry. The entire place looked horrible. I had to hold myself back to not do more than the list because I hate leaving work unfinished, but I was finally done. I approached the teachers of the classroom that I had to clean today beforehand, explained the situation, and promised them to give their classrooms a proper cleaning the next day because they and the students shouldn't be the victims of my malicious compliance. But they were in on it. They even agreed to give their signature on my task list to sign off that they think I did all of the work correctly. Naturally, the custodian didn't like my work today, and we had a good heart-to-heart for a moment. I told him that I really appreciate that he wants to safeguard the quality of my work. It's what they pay me for after all. But I hope that I've shown him and some teachers that I do go above and beyond daily, and that today's work, that looked like a mess, was my company standard. I also let him know that the constant badgering was incredibly unmotivating. It was really putting a dampener on my spirits. I told him that I'd be doing my work normally again tomorrow, and he said he appreciated all the work I usually do, and that he'd tried to be more flexible as well and put more trust in me. All's well that ends well, I suppose. I just want to make sure that these special needs children have a clean school to learn, laugh, and play in after all.
And yeah, you know what? It is good that it ended well because ultimately you clearly are very good at your job and you have the best intentions and you're doing good stuff. I don't really get why your boss, your custodian, would get so anal about this sort of stuff. You're doing an amazing job already. Why does it matter if one tiny thing is wrong? It's like they have to realize that you are so good at what you're doing, but yeah, there are always going to be tiny errors from anyone that does any job ever. It's one of those ones where they didn't realize how good you were until you weren't doing as good a job as you normally do. But as you say, the main thing is that the kids are okay and the teachers have a good environment to teach in. And that's exactly what you created. So good stuff.
Stop wasting time and follow the job order. Yesterday, I got an email from a customer who wanted an in-depth analysis of dish soap sales for the past 3 years. Easy peasy, it's all automated, but time consuming to extract that much data. As I was entering the details into the software according to the job order, I see customer specified product code A190. I checked the database and uh-oh, that's the code for scented candles. I think they meant A160, dish soap. Due to past shenanigans, we're supposed to follow job orders to the letter, and if there is a conflict, the product code trumps over whatever else the customer wrote. This is spelled out very clearly in our service agreements. However, if I suspect a mistake, I will give the customer a call so they can amend the job order and avoid wasting time and money. They're usually grateful for the heads up. So I call the customer and I barely manage to say that I'm from the company. Then this lady starts berating me about how long the job is taking. First off, I got the timestamped email less than 15 minutes ago, and this kind of report usually has a turnaround of 24 to 48 hours. Secondly, I'm trying to help by pointing out the wrong product code. But this lady just will not let me talk. She keeps cutting me off and talking over me. When I finally managed to get 2 words in and say I wanted to confirm the product code, she tells me to stop wasting her time and just do what the job order says. Then she hangs up on me. You can probably guess how it went. I ran the request as written for product A190, the candles, and I sent it yesterday by EOB. The lady flipped when she saw it. Apparently, they needed this report for a meeting that now has to be rescheduled. My boss and her boss got involved. The end result is that the customer's boss just sent me a request to please run a report for dish soap, A160, when convenient, and apologizing for the misunderstanding. My company will waive the cost of the extra reports. I understand the lady was moved to a role that limits the amount of damage she can do. Already the fact that she ordered the report the literal day before the meeting wasn't great. Moral of the story: before telling someone to shut up, maybe listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, I can't lie, I've definitely been in this spot before where you yourself, as in me, have left something until the last minute and then you expect someone else to help you with it really quickly and you're very impatient, etc., etc. when just because you made a mistake in leaving it so last minute doesn't mean that it's an emergency on their part. That being said, not listening to what you were saying when it's your job to know what is going on is criminal. 5 seconds of shutting your mouth would have saved so much time and ultimately money. You're lucky you got that money back because realistically, you didn't deserve it. I knew my job, but the new manager thought he knew better, so I did it his way, very precisely. So I used to work for one of the top delivery companies in the UK. There was a lot less competition 15 years ago. I was very good at my specific delivery job, and I often undertook every office task from single delivery routes to maintaining the office and delivery distribution to all routes. Then one day, in comes the new manager, and it was the cliche that you dread. You've probably all met the type. Suit slightly too big and a trainee moustache. He'd just finished uni and, to his credit, got himself a business degree. The problem with this company was every office around the whole country was run differently, and this poor manager was expecting every person to do things by the letter. But most of the work was done on goodwill since we were allowed to finish for the day when we completed our deliveries. It was creating a rod for our own backs, to be honest, but it was nice to finish earlier on lighter days. Finally, on his third day after watching me daily and asking me why I was doing things in certain orders, I told him my delivery route was complex and required it to be done in a certain order to ensure the time deliveries got there before 1 PM and the other delivery staff were fed their delivery materials by myself at certain times to ensure optimum delivery speeds and minimum delay. He replied, "No, it doesn't work like that." I simply stared for a bemused few seconds and said, "I don't understand." He wanted it by the letter today as per company guidelines. I argued very hard against it and said he will really regret it because we won't complete, but he insisted I was wrong because it was all timed and measured. So, after an exasperated 15-minute heated discussion, I did as I was told, to the letter. The 5 staff I fed deliveries to weren't happy, but they understood. It was like a domino effect of carnage. At 12:30 PM, we all rang in the office to report the failed time deliveries, which he promptly freaked out about because they were strictly monitored. The subsequent enforced break times and shuffling required also left 15 to 20% of each walk unfinished, which he also now has to complete himself on top of the timed ones. He had to fill out reports for all failed 1 PM deliveries, all walk failures, and then had to call in managers from other offices to finish it all. They all finished around 4 hours late. He was not popular. The next day he came to me and asked me to show him the mechanics of the delivery route in detail because I didn't expect that to happen, if I'm honest. It was close enough to an apology for me. We actually became good friends over time, but he never questioned me when I said nope ever again. This story reminds me of the second story we looked at in today's episode in many ways. Again though, it's great that he learned his lesson, but I don't know, if something's going well in the first place, do you really need to change it up? That being said, he's a young guy looking to make his mark on the company. I kind of get it, I can kind of understand it from his perspective, and he did do well to rectify it within 1 day. So, you know what? Not the worst, not the best. Like, imagine if he doubled down and said, no, I'm the manager, I know how to run this, and efficiency got even worse. That would be the sign of someone that doesn't learn from their mistakes. Whereas this guy made a mistake, accepted it pretty quickly. Yeah, his apology wasn't great, but at least he acknowledged that he'd done something wrong. You want me to coerce an inspector after someone else did the work? This happened years ago. I just started working as an independent electrician, and one day I received a call from a new customer. He was one of those people that flips homes in lower income neighborhoods. I'll call him Todd, but honestly, I've forgotten what his name is. Todd asked me to meet him at a vacant house he recently bought to give him an estimate for a full rewiring job. He was 30 minutes late, so I was already unimpressed with him. Upon entering the house, which was right after a rainstorm had passed through, we found an inch of water covering the hardwood floors. There was water pouring out of small holes in the columns on the front porch. Everything was soaked. Instead of showing me around, Todd called his business partner and brother and spent the next 20 minutes cussing him for not fixing the roof. I'm standing around and listening to his man-baby rage on full display. The whole time I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to work for this guy. His fuse was way too short and his anger was out of hand. I gave him a price, which admittedly was the I don't want to do this job price, and I didn't hear back from him until months later. Todd called me later that year. He explained that he'd found an electrician from 3 states away and had paid the electrician with ceramic tiles instead of cash. The problem now, well, he needed an inspection from the city electrical inspector. I agreed to meet the inspector for him, which I would bill him for. I went back to the house about 20 minutes before the inspector showed up and saw numerous issues. When the inspector arrived, we walked through together. Every issue I saw, the inspector also saw. He pointed them out, and every time I agreed with him that the work was not up to code.
This inspector kept looking at me with a puzzled expression. After we did a complete walkthrough, I finally explained to the inspector that I didn't do any of the work, and I was hired to get him to pass the inspection. He asked me if I thought he should, and I told him absolutely not. So I got paid for my time, I got paid to repair all the violations, and I formed a strong relationship with that inspector, who was always lenient with me on all of my future jobs. Alright, just trying to get my head around this one. So the same person that wanted you to do a job for him in the first place, but then was clearly horrible to work with and you pretty much said no, then re-employed you for another job in which the whole point was that you were going to help him out, but there was no reason for you to do so? I don't understand. But yeah, I guess that shows a lack of logic from some people in the subreddit. I guess it also proves that even if sometimes things do seem a little bit expensive, they might be expensive for a reason. If you get someone unqualified to do something for some weird trade deal, then yeah, you're going to have problems later on down the line because the work's not going to be good enough. Whereas this guy, you pay the premium at first, but then ultimately you get good work that's going to last for years. Ultimately, it's just strange. I don't know why this guy, having treated you so badly, thought, yeah, he's going to help me out next time and get me a pass. Obviously, it wasn't going to happen, you mug. No one ever makes it hot enough? Okay, then you asked for it. I used to be a chef in a Mexican restaurant in a small town in Australia nearly 40 years ago. We were modestly popular and I loved working there. One night, a young man came in to dine with a young lady. It was very obviously a first date. They ordered nachos to share with a side of jalapenos for their entree, and he ordered a steak Veracruz, hot, for his main, and the young lady ordered a chicken burrito, mild, for hers. I, as I usually did throughout the nights, would walk around the tables and ask if people were enjoying the food. After the nachos, I checked on them, and the young man informed me that the chili that accompanied the nachos was not hot at all, and that he loved hot food. I was informed that he had traveled extensively and had eaten some of the hottest food in the world, and that no one had ever made a dish too hot for him. He reiterated that he wanted his steak main extra hot. To be honest, I found him to be pompous and rather obnoxious in the way he was speaking down to me, and found myself taking a disliking to him. I will add at this point that the young lady was looking a little uncomfortable, and I got the impression her date was not going as she had expected. I headed to the kitchen. I made her a lovely chicken burrito while putting together his steak. He wanted it hot. He was going to get it. Our steak Veracruz was usually a steak cooked and topped with our house tomato sauce base with some capsicums, bell peppers for you Americans, and onions with a touch of chili. On this occasion, I set to work. Keep in mind, this was Australia back in the 80s, and we did not get a lot of different chilies back then, and a jalapeno was considered hot by most Aussie palates. Hey, we were an uneducated bunch. I had a few bird's eye chilies in the kitchen that were mainly there for the staff and the resident Mexican guitarist's meals, so I started with those. I finally diced about 10 of those with their seeds. I then started sweating off my onions and capsicums. I then threw in the chilies, and then I added about a tablespoon of chili powder and about a tablespoon of cayenne. I soon felt the fumes hit my nose and the back of my throat, and my eyes started watering. I ran to the door of the kitchen to get a breath of breathable air, as the air in my tiny kitchen was rapidly becoming unbreathable. I ran back to my pan and put a ladle of the house tomato sauce in. I then let that simmer for a few minutes. I then added some chopped up jalapenos from a jar in my fridge and thought, why not? And in went a little bit more chili powder. I then put the flash fried steak in to finish it off in the sauce. I served it all up on a plate with some rice, served out the chicken burrito, and hit the bell for the waitress to serve it to the table. The waitress came back and told me that as she placed it in front of him, he said, "This had better be hot." She assured him the chef had done as he requested. I went to the door of the kitchen, joined by my waitress, to watch the show unfold, and unfold it did. I watched with glee as he sliced the steak, took a piece on his fork, and with a smug look on his face, he put it in his mouth. He took a chew and then realized his mistake. I saw it. That moment when his face changed, but he was trying so hard not to show it. He couldn't. He was on a date and he'd bragged so hard, and now he had to go through with it. He ate the steak. I could see every ounce of pain on his face. He struggled. He struggled hard. His date watched him with a slight smile on her lips, and I got the impression that she was thoroughly enjoying his pain. He went through several jugs of water. He sweated. He barely spoke. He looked danged uncomfortable. At the end of the meal, I came out of the kitchen and asked him if he'd enjoyed. His words could have been hotter. He never came back. His date, she became a regular and told us he was an insufferable fool and she never saw him again. I have no regrets other than I wish Carolina Reapers had been around then.
You know what? I think that everybody in their life has met someone like this guy. Someone that just wants to show off, act as if they're just way more cool than they really are, when in reality, they're just making themselves look stupid. As you've seen by this girl's reaction, she wasn't having any of it. No one likes arrogance and cockiness. There's no need for that. The great thing about stories in this subreddit is that a lot of the time, people like OP are doing literally as they're asked. You know, the guy said, make it as hot as you possibly can. He did that, and he couldn't deal with it. That is just brilliant, because you're doing what he said, and he can't handle it. So get out.
Now for our next malicious compliance story. Why did they get in for free? Let me fix that. I used to work as a bouncer / doorman at a bar that charged a $2 cover on weekend nights. Everyone paid to get in with only one exception: party buses. We had an agreement with the different party bus operators that if they brought their groups to our bar, they would get in for free. Lively crowds are good for business. So one night I'm working and a guy comes in with his girlfriend and I tell him it's $2 a head. He grumbles about it and I give him the same line I tell anyone who complains. A $2 cover is the cheapest thing you will buy here tonight. If you can't afford it, you might want to go somewhere else. He doesn't want to look cheap in front of his lady, so of course he pays. A couple of minutes later, he's back, saying he just talked to some people who didn't have to pay, and wants to know why he got singled out. I tell him about the party bus rule, and say those people must have come in on a bus. He motions towards some people sitting with his girlfriend and tells me, "You didn't charge my friends and they didn't come on a bus." I recognize the people, and when they came in, I asked them if they were from the bus, and they had said yes. So they lied to me. It happens, and normally I wouldn't worry about it. I tell him, well, it sounds like I made a mistake. I guess it's their lucky night. That's my hint to him that he should let it go. But that's not good enough for him. He gets louder and keeps demanding I refund his $4 to keep things fair. I've had it with him. I tell him, you're right, it's not fair. Let me fix it for you. He smirks because he thinks he's getting a refund, but he doesn't realize that all I'm giving is some sweet malicious compliance. His smirk disappeared when I stepped away from the cash drawer and walked over to where his friends were sitting. In my most polite voice, I said, "Hey, sorry to bother you guys, but there's a $2 cover tonight, and your friend here told me you didn't pay. I must have misheard you when I asked if you were here with the party bus, but I need to collect the cover from you now." The looks of betrayal they gave him were priceless. I collected their covers, smiled, and loudly thanked him for being so honest. Then I walked back to my post and watched them proceed to rip him a new one. I just don't get it. What did he expect to happen there? Did he really think that it was more likely that OP was going to say, okay, fine, I'll let you off, or go over to the other people who have lied to his face and get the money that is rightfully the properties, the companies, the bars? Like, he was obviously going to do that. What did this guy expect? And now, as expected, his friends are going to be like, well, mate, why did you do that? Why have you snaked us? And he's going to have no answer. So dumb. Also, all this for $2. I mean, what? What is going on? I think that amount of money is literally just put in place to make sure that you don't get absolute wrong-uns coming into this establishment. $2, and you're complaining about it. How much to drink? What? I just don't get it. I just really don't get it. But hey, great malicious compliance nonetheless. Don't care about people calling me on your old number? I'll sort it. I just moved to Australia and gotten a new phone. But as it turns out, my number was someone else's old number. Every other week, I'd get calls by a tradie who wanted to know why I wasn't on site, mate, or what I wanted done with building projects ABC. Every time I explained at length that they got the wrong number, and quite often folks on the other end were absolutely rude or thought I was taking the mick and insisted I answer their questions or show up on site now. I was over it, so I googled my own number and did some digging, and eventually found out the guy who had my number before, then his new number, and then I called him. I politely explained my dilemma, pointed out that there were 2 websites that still had his old, my now new number, and if he could please change this and let his contacts know about his new number and to delete the old one, as it was getting quite tedious for me. By that time, I'd used my number for work, visa applications, and landlords and friends, and changing it would have been a huge pain. I explained all of that. Well, of course, he was just as pleasant as most of his contacts and told me something along the lines of, "I don't give a frick, mate. That's not my problem. Get screwed, sort your own stuff out, mate. Well, the universe provides, and so I got a great opportunity to do just that only a few weeks later. I received a call in the early hours of one morning by another disgruntled guy, telling me he was early and demanding to know where I wanted the sand put down and how to get in. I asked what sand and was told he had a full truckload of sand as ordered and no one was on site and it was all fenced off. Very briefly did I think about launching into my explanation, but I was tired and over it, and then realized the opportunity provided. I snapped back at him with no uncertainty. Mate, it's all good. Dump it all right in the driveway in front of the fence. We'll sort it out when we get there. The guy said, "You sure, mate? It's a lot of sand." "Absolutely sure, mate. Thanks a lot." "All right then, boss." And he hangs up. Well, I go back to bed, snoozing for another hour with a big smile until my phone rings again, and I see it's old mate with his new number who I saved when I called him a few weeks ago. I pick up rather chipper, and he doesn't waste any time, launching into a series of swear words, and now he has no access to the site, and that he has to move a literal ton of sand by hand, and whether or not I told the sand guy to dump it all there. I replied, "You told me to sort this out myself. This is me sorting this out. You can remove the numbers and let your contacts know or not. Totally up to you, mate." He was fuming, calling me a few more choice words, promising to fire me and a lot more before we ended the conversation. However, the numbers disappeared from the internet really quickly after that, and I never got another call again. I still have my number, and every time I see a truck with sand, I chuckle to myself, thinking of this guy moving a ton of sand by hand and losing a fair few hours of labor because he was a douchebag and couldn't be bothered sending a few texts. An absolute gem of a malicious compliance story right there. I just picture this guy, right, coming up to this place and just seeing a literal ton of sand, a lump of sand blocking his way in and thinking, "Oh no, I really should have sent a few texts, shouldn't I? This is not going to be fun." And once again, his lack of getting on top of things and just being rude to you, OP, he deserves this. He really does. Once again, like the previous story, this guy clearly didn't have the brains to foresee how this would end. Therefore, it is on him. That's the beauty of this subreddit, as I said. The fact of the matter is, these guys are just bringing this horrible stuff onto themselves, and it's not even really OP's fault that this happened. What do you expect them to do? Say once again, or just say for the rest of time, "Sorry, this isn't my number"? No, he's going to get fed up and he's going to make you make that change. And there you go. It happened. So guys, there it is. That is it for this one. And that is it for movie week. What an adventure it's been. If you guys didn't know, I did all this because I'm currently in India. If you're watching this at the time it's been released, I'm currently in India on holiday, and yeah, you guys absolutely love the movie, so I thought, why not just give you 7 in a row? Why not just throw everything at you? See if you can handle it. Working it out, that's over 20 hours of content that I've released on YouTube in just this week. It's a lot, isn't it, really? But if you've managed to consume it all and you enjoyed it, then wow, fair play to you and your extended family. Comment down below, which movie was your favorite, and did you enjoy this one? And if you want me to do this again, then yeah, drop a like on this one, subscribe, follow for more, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow back with a more normal length episode.